Chapter 1, A baby with infinite power, and no motivation. The last thing Alex Bayley remembered was the soothing glow of his TV screen as he mindlessly scrolled through his backlog of anime. His biggest concern had been whether to rewatch Hunter x Hunter or start a new series. Then, darkness. When he woke up again, everything was too loud, too bright, and he was crying uncontrollably. His body felt weak, small, and completely out of his control. It didn't take long for the horrifying realization to sink in. He had been reborn. At first, he thought it was some kind of weird isekai dream. But as time passed, as he heard the distinct names of places, Metropolis, Gotham, LexCorp, and saw Superman flashing on TV screens, one thing became crystal clear. He was in the DC universe. The worst place to exist as a regular human. For the first few years, Alex did the smart thing. He did nothing. He didn't know if he had powers. He didn't know what kind of crazy cosmic bullshit existed in this version of DC. So he kept his head down, acted like a normal kid, and tried not to think about how at any moment, some alien invasion or magic apocalypse could kill him. But then, on his 5th birthday, something weird happened. His mother, Maria Bayley, had taken him to a toy store, letting him pick out anything he wanted. His father, John Bayley, a tired but kind factory worker, had saved up money just for this. It should have been a normal, peaceful day. Then, a robbery happened. A couple of thugs stormed in, waving guns, yelling, scaring everyone. Alex, still a 5-year-old in body, felt that raw primal fear kick in. And then, his body changed. 1 second, he was a tiny, defenseless child. The next, he was Optimus Prime. Not a kid-sized version. Not a cheap knockoff. The actual, full-sized, blaster-wielding, truck-transforming Prime. The thugs barely had time to scream before Alex, panicked out of his mind, reflexively fired an energy blast into the ceiling, causing debris to fall and knocking them out cold. Silence. His mother fainted. His father just stared, slack-jawed. And Alex? He immediately transformed back into a kid and played dumb. It wasn't me, he stammered, pretending to cry. The robot just showed up. His parents, bless their gullible hearts, actually bought it. But Alex knew the truth. He had a power. And after some careful experimenting over the next year, he figured it out. He could turn into any fictional character he had knowledge of. Superheroes, anime characters, video game icons, anything. And he kept their abilities. His first thought? I am absolutely never using this in public again. With an OP ability like this, anyone else might have jumped at the chance to be a hero. To fight crime, to be the next Superman. Not Alex. He had read too many comics to fall for that trap. The moment you put on a costume, your life becomes hell. The Justice League, villains, the government, everyone would hound you non-stop. And even worse? You become a target. So Alex did the logical thing. He used his powers only for convenience. Needed to ace a test? He'd transform into Reed Richards for a few minutes. Too lazy to walk somewhere? He'd turn into the Flash just long enough to get there. Needed to reach the top shelf? Yoda form, baby. But no fighting crime, no drawing attention. He was not an idiot. His plan was perfect. Until that happened. Alex had spent 10 peaceful years coasting by, living a simple, stress-free life. His parents were average, loving people. They weren't rich, they weren't special, but they were good. They worked hard, they cared about him, and even though Alex never really felt a deep emotional attachment, he appreciated them. He loved them in his own way. Then, one day, Lex Luthor had a bad idea. A prototype battle drone, designed to counter Superman, malfunctioned. It went rogue. Right in the middle of Metropolis shopping district. And guess where Alex and his parents were that day? The moment the attack began, people screamed and ran. The drone fired energy blasts, tearing through buildings. Cars exploded. Chaos erupted. Alex, caught in the middle of it, froze. He could have stopped it. One transformation. That's all it would have taken. Turn into Saitama, Hulk, Goku, hell, even Megamind with a death ray, and it would have been over in seconds. But he hesitated. He was afraid. By the time he snapped out of it, by the time he actually moved, his parents were already dead. Crushed under a collapsed building. And Alex? He felt nothing. Not at first. Not like in the movies, where grief hits immediately. He just stared at the rubble, at the blood-stained concrete, at the people wailing around him. His mind was blank. It wasn't until later, sitting alone in a cold, unfamiliar hospital, that it finally clicked. They were gone. The people who had raised him, fed him, given him a home, were just gone. And the worst part? He could have saved them. After the funeral, the social workers tried to talk to him. Tried to place him in foster care. He barely listened. He wasn't angry. He wasn't vowing revenge. He wasn't about to go full Batman and dedicate his life to justice. But he did make one promise to himself. Next time, I won't hesitate. Not because of justice. Not because of responsibility. Just because dying is inconvenient. If he was going to survive in this world, he had to be ready. Even if he didn't want to be. Even if all he really wanted, was to be left alone. Chapter 2, the day Superman knocked on my door. A cashier's life ain't easy. Being a cashier wasn't exactly the dream job of a man who could transform into literal gods. But Alex Bayley? He had long accepted that ambition was too much work. He liked his small, predictable life. Working the register, scanning groceries, and engaging in the occasional verbal warfare with the Karen who somehow made his shifts more entertaining. $15.72, Alex said lazily, scanning the last of her items. The woman, Margaret, a middle-aged menace with the confidence of a queen, scoffed as she adjusted her overpriced sunglasses. Are you sure you scanned that right? Last time, it was $15.50. Alex gave her a deadpan look. Yeah, and last time, inflation wasn't throat-punching the economy. Margaret smirked. Humph. You're getting slower with those comebacks, cashier boy. Losing your touch. Alex shrugged. Maybe I just like letting you win sometimes. She rolled her eyes but smirked, taking her bag. See you tomorrow, smart mouth. You know you love me, Alex called after her as she left. Keep dreaming, cashier. It was their routine. She gave him hell, he dished it back, and somehow, over time, they had developed an odd mutual respect. Most people despised dealing with Karen's Alex. He admired how Margaret never backed down. He wasn't sure if that meant he had terrible taste in people, but it made his shifts less dull. As he started scanning the next customer's items, the bell above the store door chimed, and someone stepped in. Superman. Wait. What? Alex blinked. Then blinked again. Superman, the Superman, stood at the entrance, looking around like a regular customer. A few people gasped. Some started whispering. One teenager immediately took out his phone. Alex, however, felt cold sweat forming on his back. Did he find out? Had someone seen him use his powers before? Had Batman done that creepy detective thing and somehow figured out that a cashier in his 20s had thrown an Amazon drone into the sun 10 years ago? If Batman knew, then... Oh God! Did Batman know? Superman, meanwhile, just walked up to the counter and gave Alex a polite nod. Good afternoon, he said, voice as warm and friendly as ever. Do you sell the latest issue of the Daily Planet here? Alex stared for a solid 3 seconds before his brain caught up. Oh. Yeah. He turned, grabbed the latest newspaper from the rack behind him, and handed it over. That'll be $2. Superman reached into his pocket, his actual pocket, and pulled out cash like a regular dude, handing it over. Alex gave him the change, and that was that. No weird questions. No accusations. Just a customer buying a newspaper. Alex let out a breath of relief. Superman nodded his thanks, grabbed a coffee from the machine nearby, and sat down. At a table. Reading. Like a normal guy. What the hell? The entire store was stunned. People took pictures, whispering, and even Alex had to admit this was surreal. And that's how the next 20 minutes passed. Alex continued checking out customers while Superman just read his paper and drank his coffee, completely unbothered by the growing crowd taking photos. It was almost normal. Until, of course. Disaster struck. A sonic boom shook the street outside. Then explosions. Screams. Alex immediately knew something was wrong. Superman's head snapped up. His coffee forgotten, he rushed out the door at blinding speed, and Alex followed him to the entrance, peeking outside. His heart sank. An Amazon unit. A sleek, chrome-plated android hovered in the air, its eyes glowing red, scanning the area. Amazon. The adaptive AI. The League's nightmare. And it was here. Superman, the android's voice echoed. Stand down. You are to be detained. Superman narrowed his eyes. That's not happening. Amazon attacked immediately, firing energy beams that Superman barely dodged before rushing in for a counterattack. The fight escalated fast. Buildings shattered. Cars flipped. People ran screaming. And Alex? He stayed right inside the store, watching. Because this was not his problem. Right? Right? Superman was losing. Alex saw it immediately. Amazon was too fast, countering every move, copying Superman's powers in real time. And the longer the fight dragged on, the worse it got. Superman called for backup, but the League wasn't here yet. And the more Alex watched, the more that gnawing feeling in his gut grew. That same hesitation he had 10 years ago. He could do nothing. Stay inside. Wait it out. Or... fuck it. Alex turned and walked out the back door. Once he was out of sight, he took a deep breath. Then he transformed. A massive green figure erupted from where Alex had stood. His body bulged, muscles expanding, veins pulsing. His skin darkened to an unnatural shade of green, his clothes stretching before ripping apart completely, replaced by ragged purple pants. Power. Pure, unfiltered power surged through his veins. Alex, now the Hulk, took one massive leap. And landed in the middle of the street. Boom. The impact shook the entire block, creating a crater. The ground cracked beneath his feet. People gasped, stunned, pointing at him in shock. Superman, mid-air, froze. His eyes widened. Amazon turned its head, scanning him. New adaptive target identified, Hulk. It tried to copy him. But it couldn't. Because Hulk wasn't human? The android hesitated, its system struggling to process the data. And in that moment, Alex grabbed it by the face and threw it into orbit. Amazo became a silver speck in the sky, disappearing beyond the atmosphere. The street was dead silent. Superman stared at him, still hovering mid-air. People around them whispered. Was that the Hulk? No way, he's from Marvel Comics. That's not possible, right? Alex didn't stick around. The moment Amazo was gone, he jumped. Straight up. Over the skyline. Out of sight. By the time he landed far away he had already transformed back into regular old Alex Bayley. And as he walked away, hands stuffed in his pockets, he let out a sigh. Welp. That's gonna be a problem. Alex had one rule: stay out of trouble. But now? The world knew the Hulk existed. And soon enough, someone was going to come looking for him. Chapter 3, When Batman Comes Knocking. The scent of perfectly cooked chicken and rice filled Alex Bayley's small apartment. Despite his lack of ambition, he had to admit his Pokémon World Chef transformation was a godsend. Every meal he made was 5-star quality, and he had long since stopped wasting money on takeout when he could whip up something delicious in seconds. He took a slow bite, savoring the rich umami flavor. God, I'm amazing, Alex muttered to himself, watching TV as he ate. Then. Knock. 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 Alex sighed, not even looking up. The door's open, he called out lazily, taking another bite. The door creaked open, and heavy footsteps entered. Alex froze mid-chew as his eyes lifted from his bowl. A long, flowing black cape. A dark cowl covering a grim face. White, piercing eyes staring directly at him. Batman. Alex stared. Batman stared back. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Alex swallowed. Hold up. Alex set his bowl down, raising an eyebrow. Okay, first of all, my door is supposed to only let in cheerful attitudes. How the hell did you get in? Batman didn't even blink. Instead, he reached into his belt, pulled out a photograph, and tossed it onto the table. Alex glanced down. It was a picture of a toy store. Or rather, what used to be a toy store. Because Optimus Prime was currently bursting through the damn roof, towering over Metropolis. Alex let out a low whistle. Wow. Weird world, hey. Batman did not look amused. It's you, Batman said simply. Just like the Hulk. Alex scoffed. Pff me? Come on. Why would I? Batman's gaze sharpened. Alex sighed. Alright, fine. Let's say I was the Hulk. And maybe I did chuck Amazo into space. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Batman didn't answer. Instead, he asked, what's the limit? Alex's eyes narrowed. That was a dangerous question. Get out. Batman didn't move. How many forms can you take? Alex's fingers twitched. I said, get out. Batman remained silent, his presence unshakable. Then, before Alex could react, Martian Manhunter phased through the wall. Alex stilled. Oh. So that's how it's gonna be, hey? Martian Manhunter's red eyes locked onto him. Alex felt the faintest pressure in his mind, like an invisible hand gently knocking on his mental walls. But Alex? Alex smirked. Two can play that game. With a single thought. His entire body shifted, his form warping, his mind restructuring itself. Within seconds, he was no longer Alex Bayley. He was Professor X. A powerful, bald-headed telepath with enough mental strength to rival even Martian Manhunter. Martian's expression immediately changed. His head snapped back, his connection to Alex's mind forcefully severed. He staggered. What? Alex smirked, leaning forward. Nice try, Green Bean. But you're messing with Professor Charles Xavier now. Martian visibly struggled to re-enter his mind, but Alex's transformation held firm, his mental defenses impenetrable. Even Batman, ever stoic, seemed mildly intrigued. Alex stretched his arms lazily. Welp. Looks like you guys aren't playing fair. Then he transformed again. In an instant, Alex's body shifted, his bald head now covered in a yellow cowl, red lightning sparking across his body. His mind raced with speedster instincts. And then, he was gone. A red and yellow blur shot past Batman and Martian Manhunter, blowing the door off its hinges as Alex vanished down the street. Back in the apartment, Martian Manhunter was still dazed, his mind still recovering from the telepathic battle. Batman, however, remained completely still. Watching. Processing. Analyzing. Because Alex hadn't just transformed into some random speedster. He had transformed into Reverse Flash. And that? That raised a lot of questions. Chapter 4, Superman, Paper and an Imitation Game. The beeping scanner filled the air as Alex slowly dragged a bottle of hand sanitizer over it. Margaret, his favorite store Karen, stood in front of him with a pursed lip frown, her arms crossed. You did that on purpose, she accused. Alex raised an eyebrow, scanning her next item at an equally painfully slow pace. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said innocently. Margaret scoffed. I swear, you are the worst cashier I've ever met. Alex smirked. And yet, here you are, every day, standing in this exact spot, buying things you don't actually need. Margaret narrowed her eyes. I need this hand sanitizer. Uh-huh, Alex nodded, scanning her next item, a 12-pack of assorted highlighters. For what? Margaret? Are you grading papers now? Margaret huffed, snatching the pack. Maybe I like color-coding my grocery lists, Alex. Ever think about that? Alex grinned. You color-code groceries? Damn. You really are built different. Margaret rolled her eyes, but there was a small smile on her face. She reached into her purse, pulling out her card. As she swiped, her demeanor shifted. The usual playful fire in her eyes dimmed for just a moment. Stay safe, all right, she muttered. Alex blinked, slightly caught off guard. Margaret never said stuff like that. It had only been a week since the world saw the Hulk throw a killer android into orbit right down the street from here. It made sense that people were still shaken. Alex, for his part, just grinned lazily. Ah, Margaret. Didn't know you cared. Margaret scoffed, taking her bags. I don't. Just need someone to keep annoying. With that, she walked out. And Alex? Alex smiled. 10 minutes later. The door chimed again. Alex, not looking up, grabbed the next item. Welcome to Quick Mart, please don't. Then he paused. The store was empty. Except for one person. Superman. Alex stared. Superman smiled. Hey, do you have the latest Daily Planet? Alex silently reached under the counter, pulling out the newspaper, and slid it forward. Superman took it, glancing over the front page. Nothing else? Alex asked, arms crossed. Superman smirked. Well, I do have a question. Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, ask it, or else I'll just mentally check out and go full NPC mode. Superman chuckled. Fair enough. He folded the paper under his arm. How much can you turn into? Alex raised a brow. That was, oddly direct, but not assertive. He thought about lying. But this was Superman. His BS detector was probably as strong as his heat vision. So instead, Alex shrugged. So far. He tilted his head. Anything. Humans, animals, monsters, cartoons, anime characters, you name it. Superman blinked, clearly processing that information. Then, he chuckled. All right, what about me? Alex grinned. Funny you should say that. A second later, he was gone. In his place stood Superman. Same height, same build, same costume. The cape even fluttered. Superman's eyebrows lifted slightly. Hey. Alex, still in Superman's form, smirked. Shocking, right? Superman folded his arms, clearly amused. What about Batman? Alex grinned. A second later, his form shifted again, his red and blue replaced by black and grey armor, his face hidden under a cowl. Then, in the most gravelly voice possible, Alex muttered. Iron Man sucks. Superman burst out laughing. Alex shifted back to himself, a cocky smirk on his face. Superman wiped a tear. I don't think I've ever heard Batman say that. Oh, but he's thought it, Alex said, leaning on the counter. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. Superman shook his head, still smiling. All right, I'll leave you alone. He reached into his belt, pulling out a small communicator, placing it on the counter. If you ever need us, he said, we're there. Alex stared at the device for a moment. Then, with a sigh, he pocketed it. Yeah. Now get out before you tank my productivity. Superman gave a small salute. See you around, Alex. And then he was gone. Alex leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Then he sighed. Great, he muttered. Now I have Batman and Superman watching me. But oddly, he didn't mind it as much as he thought. Chapter 5, Unstable Perfection. Deep within Cadmus Laboratories, beneath layers of reinforced steel and secrecy, two of the most powerful political figures in the world stood in silence. Amanda Waller, director of Task Force X. Lex Luthor, billionaire, scientist, and Superman's most dangerous enemy. Between them, encased in a cylindrical chamber, was a single vial of blood. It wasn't Kryptonian. It wasn't Atlantean. It wasn't Martian. It was human. Yet, by all observable metrics, it was completely impossible. Luthor tapped a finger against the reinforced glass. This is all we have. Waller nodded. It was extracted from the Amazo unit after retrieval. The Justice League left very little behind. Luthor's lips pressed into a thin line. Extracting Amazo's remains had been a nightmare. Even with their best resources, the League had been too fast in cleaning up their mess. And yet, what little they'd managed to salvage. This single drop of blood was far more valuable than they ever expected. Waller turned toward one of the lead scientists. Why can't we use it? The scientist, a nervous-looking man in a lab coat, adjusted his glasses before clearing his throat. We ran every test available. At first, we assumed the sample's instability was due to the Amazo unit's data corruption. However, he hesitated. Luthor's gaze hardened. Spit it out. The scientist swallowed. The DNA itself is inherently unstable. We've never seen anything like it. Even within Amazo, it refused to be analyzed. Waller narrowed her eyes. What do you mean refused? The scientist adjusted the display on the hollow screen. It showed a split view of two different genetic structures. One was Superman's DNA, a stable double helix that practically radiated Kryptonian perfection. The other? A constantly shifting, twisting mess, its form never staying the same for more than a second. This sample, the scientist continued, doesn't have a fixed structure. It keeps changing. Mutating. Every time we attempt to map it, it takes on a new genetic sequence. Luthor leaned in, eyes narrowing. Are you saying it's some kind of adaptive DNA? The scientist nodded. That's our best guess. But it's even more extreme than Kryptonian or Martian biology. It doesn't just adapt to outside forces, it becomes something entirely different at will. Luthor frowned. And yet, this Bayley can exist without. I don't know, melting into a pile of genetic sludge. That's the mystery. The scientist clicked the holo display, showing a scan of Alex Bayley's civilian profile, his average life, his low-paying job, his lack of ambitions. He's not a metahuman, the scientist continued. Not in the way we understand them. His DNA is in constant flux, yet somehow, his body remains in perfect balance. He shouldn't exist. Waller folded her arms. And yet, he does. Luthor's eyes gleamed. If we can harness this, it would change everything. The scientist hesitated. There's a catch. Luthor glanced at him sharply. Of course there is. The scientist sighed, pulling up another data projection. While we've confirmed this DNA can be manipulated, it appears to require a living host. Any attempt to extract usable genetic material breaks down instantly unless it's within a functioning biological system. Luthor's jaw clenched. So we can't replicate it. The scientist shook his head. Not without a living clone. Silence fell over the room. Even Waller's expression flickered. They had attempted cloning before multiple times, with varying levels of catastrophic failure. Superboy himself was the only stable success. And even then, his DNA was a mess of Kryptonian and human components barely functional, and highly flawed compared to the original. If this DNA was even more unstable than that. Risky, Waller muttered. Beyond risky, the scientist corrected. Even the Superman clones retain some level of structure. This could create something completely unpredictable. Luthor's fingers drummed against the table. A clone was one option. But there was another. Perhaps, he mused, we need a different approach. Waller gave him a sharp look. Such as? Luthor's lips curled into a smirk. We can't understand the abilities on a biological level. He turned to the display showing Alex's civilian identity. But we can study them, from the source. A beat of silence. Then Waller pressed a button on her radio. This is Director Waller. Her voice was calm, but absolute. Put Alex Bayley on the capture list. Priority 1. Make it quick. The scientist paled. Even Luthor looked mildly impressed. Then again, Amanda Waller didn't waste time. She turned back to the display, watching Alex Bayley's face linger on the screen. Luthor, meanwhile, was staring at the shifting DNA model, a chaotic, ever-changing structure, somehow maintaining perfect harmony within a body that shouldn't exist. His fingers tapped his chin. How can something be so unstable, he muttered, yet so, perfectly balanced? The screen flickered, and Alex Bayley's government pictures appeared, right on the priority 1 list. Chapter 6, The Waiting Game. Alex sat comfortably in his apartment, lazily stirring a spoon through a fresh bowl of chicken and rice. The aroma filled the small space, and he let out a satisfied sigh. For the past few days, he had refused to leave. Not because he was afraid. Not because he was hiding. But because it was funny. With a smug grin, he glanced toward the front window, where the blinds were firmly shut. Just outside, 3 very annoyed individuals were standing in the cold, watching the apartment like hawks. To mess with them even more, he had taped a handwritten sign to the front door. I'm not home. Go away. The 3 figures outside were nothing short of infamous. Peacemaker with his ridiculous dove emblazoned helmet, arms crossed, clearly losing patience. Harley Quinn spinning her oversized mallet, whistling some off-key tune. Deathstroke standing slightly apart from the other 2, silent, calculating, and dangerous. Now, Peacemaker wasn't exactly known for subtlety, but he'd managed to resist kicking the door down, for now. Harley, on the other hand, was bouncing on her feet. I say we bust it down already. Come in, we got Task Force X clearance. Peacemaker sighed. For the last time, Waller said wait for the target to exit. Harley pouted. Ugh, what's the worst that could happen? He's probably just sittin' in there eatin' chips or somethin'. She wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, Deathstroke stood unmoving, scanning the apartment building with his one good eye. Unlike the other 2, he wasn't Task Force X. He had been hired for this. And frankly, if it weren't for the paycheck, he'd have already walked away. Priority 1 target, he muttered. I don't see what's so special. Peacemaker smirked. Maybe because the guy can turn into a goddamn Kryptonian. Deathstroke didn't react, but he made a mental note. He'd read the files. The transformation ability was dangerous, sure, but it was the range that concerned him. Aliens. Heroes. Villains. Monsters. There wasn't a clear limit. And if there was one thing Deathstroke hated, it was an unpredictable enemy. As the sky darkened, Harley's patience had run dry. She adjusted her grip on the mallet, stepping toward the door. That's it. I'm knocking the damn thing down. Peacemaker sighed, rubbing his temples. Harley. FWIP. The sound of a door opening echoed above them. Not the front door. The roof. A tiny grey frog hopped onto the edge of the building, staring up at them. When the hell are you guys coming? It asked, voice dripping with annoyance. It's been days, and I haven't seen or heard the door open once. For a moment, there was silence. Then. FWIP. A throwing knife whizzed through the air, aimed directly at the frog. Only for it to dodge effortlessly. The next second, the frog morphed, growing, shifting, twisting until Alex was standing there in human form, arms crossed, smirking. Wow. You guys are really committed to this, hey. Deathstroke's stance shifted. Peacemaker tensed. Harley just grinned. Oh, this is gonna be fun. Then, without hesitation, she charged forward, mallet raised. Alex sighed. All right then. His form shimmered, warping and twisting. Until, in an instant, his body transformed. Not into Superman. Not into a frog. But into Mr. Freeze. The iconic dome-shaped helmet reflected the streetlights, and in one swift motion, Alex raised his freeze gun, blasting Harley's mallet mid-swing. Crack. Ice spread across the mallet's surface in an instant, freezing it solid. Harley skidded to a halt, staring at the now completely frozen weapon. Ah, man. That ain't fair. Alex's voice came out mechanized and cold through the freeze suit. You rushed in without thinking. That is not my problem. Peacemaker had already drawn his gun. Deathstroke was reaching for another knife. Alex rolled his eyes. All right, fine. You want something flashier. His form shifted again. Metal and glass faded. Instead, his body expanded, muscles bulging, suit materializing, mustache forming. Until he stood towering over them, dressed in a white and red suit, cape billowing. Omni-Man. The entire street went silent. Even Deathstroke's fingers twitched slightly. Alex cracked his knuckles, voice booming with authority. You could have just asked. Peacemaker muttered. Oh, hell. Then without another word Alex blasted into the sky, leaving nothing but a sonic boom in his wake. Harley groaned, dropping her frozen mallet. Well, that sucks. Peacemaker rubbed his face. We really need a better plan. Deathstroke, however, was silent. He was still staring at the sky, mind racing. The data they had was correct. Alex could become Kryptonian-level threats. But seeing it in action? That was different. He needed to recalculate. Because if this guy could turn into anyone, then there was a much bigger problem. Chapter 7, A Friend in Need. The night shift was slow. Alex sat behind the counter, leaning on one elbow, absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone while sipping on a cold soda. The convenience store he worked at was practically empty, save for the occasional night owl stumbling in for a pack of cigarettes or a late-night snack. It was peaceful, in a way. But then the door's bell chimed. Alex looked up, expecting another random customer. Instead, he saw Margaret. She wasn't her usual self. Her usually pristine business attire was slightly disheveled, and her makeup was smudged, likely from crying. She carried herself slower than usual, her steps uncertain. And, most tellingly, she had a bottle of whiskey clutched tightly in one hand. Alex's eyebrows shot up. Margaret wasn't a heavy drinker, at least not in his experience. She came by often, sometimes after long days of work, chatting idly while picking up small snacks or coffee. They'd talked enough for him to know she was a tough woman, sharp as a blade. Seeing her like this? Something was very, very wrong. Without a word, Alex walked out from behind the counter and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay? Margaret sniffled, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to take another sip from the bottle. Not really, she admitted, voice raw from crying. Alex glanced around. There weren't many people in the store, but he knew she needed privacy. Come on, he said, gently guiding her toward the back room. Margaret didn't protest. Inside the small break room, she sat down heavily on the worn-out couch. Alex grabbed a bottle of water from the mini fridge and placed it in front of her before sitting across from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, Margaret let out a bitter chuckle. Cheating scumbag, and a traitorous friend. That was all Alex needed to hear to put the pieces together. Her husband cheated on her, with her friend. Alex frowned. He wasn't the type to stick his nose in other people's personal lives, but Margaret wasn't just some random customer. She was a friend. And friends didn't leave each other to suffer alone. That's rough, he said, voice calm but sincere. Margaret scoffed, rubbing her face. Understatement of the century. Alex stayed with her for hours, listening, offering the occasional sarcastic remark that managed to pull a weak chuckle from her. Eventually, she calmed down enough to eat something, so Alex grabbed a few snacks from the store and handed them to her. On the house, he said, winking. Margaret frowned. I can't just. If you don't cheer up, who am I gonna see every day? Margaret blinked, caught off guard. Then for the first time that night she actually smiled. You're an ass. I try. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. As she stood up, she grabbed the snacks, holding them a little tighter than necessary. Thanks, Alex. Anytime. With one final nod, Margaret left. But Alex? He had work to do. Once the store was empty again, Alex exhaled deeply. Then, his body warped. A digital hum filled the air as his form shifted, shrinking, twisting until he stood taller, slimmer, and distinctly mechanical. Glitch trap. A sickly golden, anthropomorphic rabbit suit, his grin permanently edged in place, empty black eyes flickering with faint digital static. Alex stretched, his voice distorted as he chuckled. Well, let's see what's going on in her life, shall we? Then he vanished. Inside the digital world, Alex materialized within a void of neon circuits and endless data streams. He was inside his own phone. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled up a connection to the internet, letting it guide him toward Margaret's personal device. It took mere seconds before he was inside her phone. From there, it was easy to access information, but what he found surprised him. Margaret wasn't just some ordinary woman. She was a high-ranking politician. And not just any politician, one with a strong focus on child advocacy. Scrolling through her files, social media, and recent projects, Alex found something even more personal. Margaret had been pushing for a specialized school for autistic children, not to normalize them, but to help them become functional members of society at their own pace. And the reason? She had a son with autism. A child she had raised with Robert, the same man who had just betrayed her. Alex felt something stir inside him. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. Margaret wasn't just a victim of betrayal. She was a mother trying her damn best to make the world a better place. And yet, she was alone. Her only real friend had been Mary, the same woman who had stabbed her in the back. Alex let out a long, distorted sigh. Or at least, the closest thing a digital virus could manage. Guess I know what I have to do. Alex's form flickered as he accessed a new function. Something unique to him. Because what nobody knew was that when Alex transformed, he didn't just gain the body. He gained the knowledge. And right now, he had William Afton's genius-level intelligence at his disposal. With a thought, he activated a high-level digital function, something Afton himself would have killed to master in life. Sadly, he was probably dodging the M.X.E.S program to notice. Mind duplication. His consciousness split into two separate but linked versions of himself. One would stay here, in the physical world. The other would remain inside Margaret's phone. The second Alex understood immediately. Stay with her. Keep her safe. Help her. The copy nodded, its form glitching slightly before settling. Then it vanished into the depths of her phone. Alex emerged from his phone, his form twisting back into his human self. He was back behind the counter. A second later, the store's bell chimed, signaling a new customer. Alex chuckled to himself, shaking his head as he prepared for another mundane transaction. Hopefully, Margaret would be okay. And if she wasn't? Well, she had him now. Geez, that's corny. Chapter 8, A Dangerous Game. Margaret Williams was done playing nice. The lawyers sat in her office, sweating bullets, each one too cowardly to even entertain the idea of going after Robert, her soon-to-be ex-husband. Each one of them found reasons to back away. Mrs. Williams, with all due respect, Robert isn't just some random scientist. He's one of LexCorp's leading researchers. Taking him to court would be suicide. You should just settle this quietly. Margaret slammed her hands on the desk, silencing the room. You all are supposed to be lawyers, she snapped. Yet you're cowering like roaches the moment Lex Luthor's shadow looms over you. The men shifted uncomfortably. One of them, an older man with graying hair, sighed. It's not just Lex, Mrs. Williams. The judges, the system itself. Do you really think anyone will stand against him? Margaret clenched her jaw, her eyes burning with cold fury. Then she pointed to the door. Get out. The lawyers hesitated. Margaret narrowed her eyes. Now. That was all it took. The men quickly gathered their belongings and scurried out like rats. Margaret exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of her nose. Cowards. Every single one of them. Her son, James, had been watching from the kitchen. The young boy, only 6 years old, sat at the counter, swinging his legs while playing with his favorite toy, a stuffed T-Rex. He wasn't fully aware of what was happening, but he could tell his mom was upset. Margaret took a deep breath, pushing aside her anger as she turned back to the kitchen. She had more important things to do right now. All right, kiddo, she said, forcing a smile. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich, coming right up. James beamed, clapping his little hands. Extra jelly. Margaret chuckled. Of course. As she prepared the sandwich, her phone rang. She glanced at it. Unknown number. Her instincts told her to ignore it, but something nagged at her. Sighing, she answered. Hello. A distorted, yet oddly familiar voice responded. Hey, Ms. Williams. I'm just your friendly neighborhood helper, William Afton. Margaret's body tensed. That name sent a chill down her spine. And boy, do I have some dirty things on your husband. Margaret immediately cut him off. What things? She demanded. Check your phone. Margaret pulled the phone away from her ear, noticing a new file attachment had appeared. With a growing sense of unease, she tapped on it. Her eyes widened. Bank transactions. Hidden offshore accounts. Deals with criminal organizations. Experiments on unwilling subjects. And worst of all? A document outlining a special project involving human testing on children. Margaret's stomach churned. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the files, her heart pounding. Robert, the man she had once loved, the man who had helped raise their son, was a monster. This, she whispered. This could put him away for years. Afton's voice came through again, his tone casual. More like forever. Margaret swallowed hard, her mind racing. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about justice. But there was a problem. How am I supposed to hire a lawyer if they're all too scared to go against Lex Corp? She asked. There was a brief pause. Then, Afton's voice took on a playful, almost teasing tone. Well, what about you? Margaret blinked. Me. You're a strong politician advocating for child education and welfare. Who better to lead this fight than you? Margaret hesitated. Could she really do this? Was she strong enough? She frowned. There was something strange about Afton's voice. You sound like a cashier guy I know, she muttered. A chuckle came through the line. Well, then he must be just as strong as you. Click. The call ended. Margaret stared at the phone for a moment. Then she steeled herself. Her eyes burned with determination. If no one else would fight this battle, then she would. For James. For the children Robert experimented on. For justice. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor's perspective. Lex Luthor didn't like surprises. Cadmus was operating smoothly, thanks to his oversight. Meta-human research was progressing, and his various business ventures were flourishing. Everything was under control. Or so he thought. His secretary, Mercy Graves, entered his office, her face impassive as ever. You have a call, she said. It's urgent. Lex raised an eyebrow. Who? Internal security. That got his attention. He reached for his phone, answering it with calm authority. Speak. A voice on the other end nervous, hesitant. Sir, there's been an incident. Lex's eyes narrowed. Clarify. One of our lead scientists, Robert Williams, has been arrested. Lex leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He remained silent, waiting for the rest. His wife has obtained sensitive information that could lead to problems. Lex's expression darkened. A loose end. His mind worked instantly, methodically. Option 1, bribery. Useless. Margaret Williams was a public figure with strong moral standing. She wouldn't be bought. Option 2, intimidation. Likely ineffective if she were easily scared, she wouldn't have acted in the first place. Option 3, elimination. Lex's voice was calm, calculated. Have our scientist let off. The meaning was clear. The voice on the other end hesitated. And the wife? Lex's eyes narrowed. She's a public figure, he murmured. Killing her outright would be messy. Mercy stepped forward. We could watch her. Monitor her movements. Find out who gave her the information. Lex nodded. Yes. Do that. He ended the call, placing the phone back down. Then, he leaned back in his chair, thinking. Who gave her the information? Margaret Williams was intelligent, but she wasn't a hacker. She didn't have the means to uncover such deeply buried secrets. No, someone had helped her. And that someone was a threat. Lex's eyes narrowed. Whoever they were, they had made an enemy of Lex Luthor. And they would regret it. Chapter 9, A Strange Proposal. The break room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the vending machine and the occasional rustling of plastic as someone passed by outside. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale bread, but Margaret didn't seem to mind. She sat on one of the worn-out chairs, her posture far more relaxed than it had been in weeks. She was doing way better now. The weight of the past few days still lingered on her shoulders, but it was lighter now. A cigarette rested between her fingers, smoke curling lazily into the air as she exhaled. Across from her, Alex leaned back in his chair, watching the smoke dissipate. Margaret caught his gaze and smirked. You smoke? Alex shook his head. Nope. Margaret chuckled, offering him one anyway. Smart choice. Alex waved a hand dismissively. I just don't like the taste. That, and I'm pretty sure I'd get addicted if I started. Margaret took another drag. Fair enough. Silence settled between them, but unlike before, it wasn't heavy. Margaret had been tense for weeks, constantly looking over her shoulder, dealing with Robert's mess, and preparing for the legal storm ahead. Now, she just felt tired. She tapped the ash off the end of her cigarette, watching it fall into the cheap plastic ashtray. You happy here, Alex? Alex thought about it for a moment. It's all right. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Just all right. He shrugged. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could probably get a scholarship in a couple of weeks and move on to something bigger. Margaret smirked. That confident, hey. Alex grinned. Hey, I know my worth. Margaret laughed at that. So why stick around? Alex leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. Because when I'm here, I get to meet people like you. Margaret blinked, caught off guard by the genuine warmth in his voice. It wasn't a flirtatious comment, nor was it some half-hearted attempt at making her feel better. It was just honest. And for the first time in a while, Margaret felt good. She smiled, looking down at her cigarette for a moment before taking another drag. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Alex just gave her a small nod, and they returned to silence. But this time, it was uncomfortable. Alex hesitated for a moment before speaking. Did Robert take James? Margaret scoffed. Of course not. Not with what I have on him. Alex raised an eyebrow at that but didn't press. Margaret was many things, but she wasn't stupid. Whatever dirt she had on Robert was big enough to keep her son safe, after all, he gave it to her. That was enough for him to know. Still, there was something else on her mind. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. I have a cruel but not entirely unwelcome gift from Robert. Alex frowned. What do you mean? Margaret glanced at him, then down at her stomach. It took Alex a second to put the pieces together. Oh. Margaret nodded. Pregnant. Alex leaned back, processing the information. Congrats, he said after a moment. Margaret smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in it. Thanks. But, she won't be able to have proper parental love. Alex's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Margaret tapped her cigarette against the ashtray again, her gaze distant. If I met a man I knew for a couple of months and we went out on dates, I'd love for him to meet James, she said. Then, she turned to Alex. Alex blinked. Margaret just watched him, waiting for his reaction. For a second, he thought she was joking. Then, he saw the seriousness in her eyes. Alex chuckled, shaking his head. That's a weird way to ask me on a date. Margaret smirked. Is it? Alex exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Well, yes. Margaret leaned back in her chair, watching him with amusement. So? What do you say? Alex grinned. Yes. I'd love to. Margaret's smirk widened. League pizza next week, then. Afterward, we head to my place. Alex nodded. I'd love that. Silence fell between them again, but this time, it was comfortable. Margaret finished her cigarette, snuffing it out in the ashtray. Alex glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. While he wasn't usually into older women, Margaret was only about 10 years older than him. Besides, she had been ordering from him at this place for years. 4 years, to be exact. And now? Now, things were different. Alex didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a while, he was excited to find out. Chapter 10, a heroic slice and a sinister proposition. League Pizza had always been a bold marketing move capitalizing on the Justice League's growing popularity. The neon lit sign above them glowed brightly against the dusk sky, featuring a pizza slice with a cape. Beneath it, the famous slogan stood proudly. The most heroic pizza around. It was corny, sure, but that didn't stop the place from being packed. Families, young couples, and groups of teenagers filled the booths and tables, eagerly chomping down on superhero-themed pizzas. Kids ran around with their plastic Superman and Batman cups, while a TV in the corner played reruns of Justice League battles with dramatic voiceovers. Alex and Margaret sat in one of the corner booths, away from the loudest parts of the restaurant. Their table was littered with a nearly finished pizza, the Martian meat lovers special, and a couple of drinks. Margaret took a sip of her soda before sighing, shaking her head. I swear, sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice with my life. Alex raised an eyebrow, chewing on his crust. What do you mean? She set her drink down and leaned back against the seat. I could have taken the easy route, you know? My family was well off. I could have lived a comfortable life, played my cards right, maybe even became some rich guy's trophy wife. She chuckled. Hell, with the way some of my old friends went, I could have been a sugar baby instead of a politician. Alex smirked. I mean, you do have the looks for it. Margaret gave him a mock glare, lightly kicking him under the table. Careful, Alex. I might start thinking you have a thing for older women. Alex grinned. I'm just saying. But instead of lounging around in luxury, you decided to actually make a difference. Margaret sighed, stirring the ice in her drink with her straw. Yeah, but was it the right choice? Did I waste all that comfort just to fight a battle that never really ends? Alex set his pizza down and reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. If you didn't take this path, then who would I have constantly checked out at Quickmart? Margaret looked at him, confused at first, until Alex smirked. Not many people color-code their grocery lists. She laughed. I told you before, that wasn't for me, it was for James. Alex leaned back. That's even better. You're not just a hard-working woman, you're a great mother too. Margaret's smile softened. You know, that's really sweet of you to say. Hey, I mean it. Margaret took another sip of her drink before glancing at Alex. Enough about me. What about your story? Alex shrugged. Not much to tell. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Come on. If it's not personal, at least tell me something. Alex sighed, resting his arms on the table. Well, my parents raised me until I was about 6. They were good people, gave me as much as they could. But then. Margaret noticed the shift in his voice. They died. Margaret's expression grew serious. I'm sorry. Alex waved a hand dismissively. It's been years. But yet, a malfunctioning robot killed them. Margaret frowned. Like LexCorp's Amazos. Something like that, Alex muttered. Of course, the company paid out compensation money, but I was still shipped off to an orphanage. Luckily, I got a good education. They called me a genius. Margaret tilted her head. But. Alex smirked. But I just didn't want to work. Margaret laughed. Seriously? Yeah, Alex nodded. I mean, I could easily get a job anywhere. But why bother? I don't really want anything. Margaret hummed, crossing her arms. At least you're not depressed and doing nothing with your life. Alex chuckled. Gee, thanks for the compliment. They continued eating, the conversation flowing easily between them. Margaret told him about her struggles in politics, how difficult it was to navigate the system as someone who genuinely wanted to help. Alex, in turn, shared small stories from his time at Quickmart, from annoying customers to the weirdest purchases he'd ever seen. Eventually, they finished their meal, and Margaret glanced at the time. I gotta head to work, she said, stretching. Maybe next time, you can come to my place. Alex smiled. I'd like that. As they stepped outside, Margaret waved before heading toward her car. Alex, however, felt something off. A black luxury car was parked a few spaces away. And as Margaret drove off, the car door opened. A young woman stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power she wielded. Mercy Graves. Lex Luthor's personal assistant. Her sharp eyes locked onto Alex as she approached. Alex, is it? She asked, stopping a few feet away. Alex shoved his hands in his pockets. That depends. Who's asking? Mercy's lips curled into a small smirk. No need for the act. My boss would like to extend an offer. Alex raised an eyebrow. Lex Luthor has a proposition for me. Mercy nodded. He believes someone with your intelligence would be wasted working at a grocery store. Alex chuckled. That's funny. I like my easy job. Mercy's smirk didn't falter. And yet, you're still here, standing in front of me, listening. Alex shrugged. Curiosity. Mercy tilted her head. Then how about this? Hear him out. No obligations. Just a simple conversation. Alex considered it for a moment before exhaling. As long as it's nothing more than a conversation. Mercy's smirk widened. Of course. She turned, gesturing toward the car. Shall we? Alex glanced at the vehicle before nodding. And just like that, he stepped into the vehicle. Chapter 11, A Game of Wits. Lex Luthor's office was exactly as Alex expected, sleek, modern, and suffocatingly immaculate. The walls were adorned with trophies of intellectual achievements, from awards to framed patents. A massive glass window overlooked Metropolis, the city bathed in a golden glow under the late evening sky. And yet, despite the grandeur, the most notable thing in the room was the silence. Alex sat in a plush chair across from Lex Luthor, the man himself. Luthor, ever the strategist, sat behind his polished obsidian desk, fingers steepled, watching Alex as though he were a puzzle waiting to be solved. There was no immediate exchange of words, no theatrical introduction. Just staring. Alex sighed internally. Is this really how he plans to spend our time? Staring at each other like we're in some kind of Mexican standoff? Luthor was expecting something, perhaps an emotional reaction. And Alex knew why. His parents had been killed by a prototype Amazo unit, an early experiment gone horribly wrong. And Luthor was curious, waiting to see if that revelation would cause any flicker of rage, grief, or resentment in his expression. But Alex wasn't giving him the satisfaction. Luthor might have been pleasantly surprised by the discovery, but Alex? He was just bored. He leaned back slightly, drumming his fingers against the armrest. That's when something else caught his attention. A different face in the room. Standing near the far corner, its eyes dim and unfeeling, was an Amazo unit. It was humanoid in shape, its body a sleek mixture of polished silver and gold plating, standing like a silent sentinel. The artificial being's expressionless face lacked any sign of emotion or thought. That was enough to finally break the silence. Alex rolled his eyes. All right, what the hell do you want from me? He gestured lazily toward the Amazo. And no, I'm not gonna help you with whatever mad scientist scheme you have cooked up. Luthor chuckled, leaning forward slightly. You misunderstand me, Alex. I don't just want your help. His voice was calm, calculated. I'm sure you need mine as well. Alex raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement creeping onto his face. Oh? And what exactly could you offer me that I can't already do myself? Luthor's expression didn't change, but his tone sharpened ever so slightly. For starters, protection. It would be a shame if certain individuals were to go after Margaret. Alex stared at him for a moment, then suddenly burst into laughter. It was genuine. The sheer audacity of the man in front of him threatening him with something so shallow and obvious was downright hilarious. You seriously think I'm that stupid? Alex said, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. He shook his head, looking at Luthor with something bordering pity. Come on, Lex, you're supposed to be a genius. You really think cheap threats are gonna work on me? Luthor remained silent, observing. Alex leaned forward, resting an elbow on the armrest and pointing a finger at him. I could easily rival some of your moderate scientists with my intellect alone. He smirked. Now imagine what the creator of the most powerful object in the universe could do if I transformed into them. The air in the room shifted. The stare down between the two men became tense. Luthor's expression remained unreadable, but Alex knew he had just gained the upper hand. The billionaire wasn't used to being in a room with people who could keep up with him, let alone challenge him. In fact, he knew that Alex had nothing to lose really. But before the tension could fully settle, Luthor spoke again. Then, if I may ask a question. His gaze narrowed slightly. Your DNA, why doesn't it work with an Amazo unit? It should be stable enough. Alex blinked. Now that was an interesting question. Not one he was expecting, but interesting nonetheless. He stood up from his chair and casually walked toward the Amazo standing in the corner. The machine remained motionless, its empty, soulless gaze staring past him. Alex tapped its metallic chest lightly. It's too unstable, I presume, he said, voice nonchalant. I already did tests myself just in case of DNA replication issues. He turned slightly, glancing back at Luthor. I've got an outline. Luthor leaned forward slightly. And what have you found? Alex scoffed. If you're thinking of having an Amazo absorb my DNA, don't bother. He patted the android's shoulder. These things? They have no soul. No individual mind. That's problem number 1. Luthor tilted his head. And problem number 2. Alex grinned. If you even tried to make a clone of me, it wouldn't last 3 minutes. He stepped back, arms crossed. My DNA is too unstable. Unless, of course, you degrade it, but then, what's the point? You'd be watering down the very thing that makes it valuable. He chuckled. And knowing you? You'd want the most powerful tool possible, wouldn't you? Silence. Then. A small smile appeared on Luthor's lips. It wasn't one of defeat. It was one of recognition. Luthor had finally met someone who wasn't just smart but someone who understood the game. But Alex? He didn't care. He had safeguards in place for Margaret and James. He wasn't worried about them. And himself? Alex wasn't just safe. He was dangerous. Guess that's why Batman makes contingencies, hey? Without another word, Alex turned and headed for the door. As he reached for the handle, he glanced over his shoulder. Try harder next time, Lex. And with that, he walked out, leaving Lex Luthor smiling behind him. Chapter 12, A Valentine's Surprise. The morning air was crisp as Alex walked down the sidewalk, a box of chocolates in one hand and a bouquet of white roses in the other. It was Valentine's Day, and for once, he had put in some effort to look the part. His usually wild hair was neatly combed, and his outfit while simple was decent enough for the occasion. Most importantly, though, he had something special planned for James. Sitting carefully on the ground beside him was a custom-built dinosaur toy, a personal creation modeled after Power Ranger mech hazards. It had taken him hours to put together, using a mix of metal, wiring, and a few miscellaneous components he had salvaged and reshaped to bring the toy to life. He even added a few moving parts, making sure it had enough articulation to be worthy of James's enthusiasm. Alex rang the doorbell and stood back, ready for the inevitable chaos. The door cracked open just enough for a pair of suspicious eyes to peek through. Then, slam. The door shut. Stranger. James's voice rang through the house. Alex burst into laughter. From inside, he could hear Margaret struggling to contain the little gremlin as James scrambled away. James. That's Alex. You know Alex. A moment later, the door reopened, this time revealing Margaret, her expression shifting from exasperation to mild surprise. She took a second to scan Alex's appearance, noting the roses, chocolates, and most surprising of all his outfit. You're looking unusually put together today, she remarked, stepping aside to let him in. Alex smirked. Well, it's a special day, isn't it? Margaret eyed the box on the ground. What's that? A surprise, Alex said. Then, with a grin, he held up the roses and chocolates. But first, these are for you. Margaret's face softened. She carefully took the bouquet, a small smile forming as she ran her fingers over the soft petals. You even got white roses, you know I love these. That's why I got 'em, Alex said with a casual shrug. James, meanwhile, had zero interest in the romantic exchange. His eyes were locked onto the box as he dragged it into the house, curiosity burning bright. Alex knelt down beside him, tapping the lid lightly. There's someone in need in there, he said in a conspiratorial whisper. Open it up and see who needs who, but be careful. James hesitated for a second before looking at his mom for approval. Margaret sighed, but seeing no immediate danger, she gave him a nod. All right, but be careful. With growing excitement, James pried the lid open. And immediately squealed loud enough to make Margaret flinch. Inside the box sat a massive dinosaur toy, half his size, its metallic body gleaming in the light. The toy's tail swished slightly, powered by a small internal mechanism Alex had installed. Its joints clicked as James grabbed it, eyes wide in amazement. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Did you buy that? Alex grinned, shaking his head. Of course not. I made it. James launched himself at Alex, wrapping his arms around him in a tight hug. Thank you, he shouted before running off with the toy, his excitement infectious. Alex chuckled, watching him go. Then, with a more serious expression, he turned to Margaret. Robert doesn't give gifts often, does he? Margaret's face faltered for just a second before she sighed. Yeah, but it's fine. She gave Alex a pointed look. At least someone is doing something now. Alex didn't push the topic further. He could already tell how she felt about it. A few hours later. The day passed in comfortable ease. Margaret sat at the dining table, occasionally sneaking glances at Alex as he worked in the kitchen. He had volunteered to cook, and despite her protests, he insisted. What she didn't know was that Alex had subtly shifted his transformation ability, altering his clothes in secret to match that of a Pokémon World chef. His knowledge of cooking techniques from that world was leagues ahead of standard methods, and he was using every trick in the book. The aroma of seasoned meat and freshly baked bread filled the house, making Margaret lean back in her chair with a satisfied sigh. You really don't have to do all this, she said, shaking her head. Alex glanced over his shoulder. Consider it payback for dealing with James's gremlin energy every day. Margaret chuckled. Fair enough. Just as Alex was plating the food, a knock came from the front door. His entire body tensed. Something felt off. Slowly, he wiped his hands on a towel and made his way to the door. He exhaled sharply before swinging it open. And immediately frowned. Standing outside, in the dim light of the evening, was a figure cloaked in shadow and authority. Batman. His imposing silhouette, the sharp white slits of his eyes, and the sheer presence he exuded made it painfully clear that he hadn't come for small talk. Alex stared at him for a second. Then, without a word, he slammed the door shut. Turning on his heel, he walked back toward the kitchen. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Who was it? Alex opened his mouth to lie. It was no Batman. The excited voice of James shattered the moment. Both Alex and Margaret froze, eyes wide. Alex slowly turned his head toward the living room. James stood near the door, giddy beyond belief as he peeked through the window. His face was practically glowing with excitement. Margaret let out a sharp breath. You closed the door on Batman. Alex pinched the bridge of his nose. Yeah, I did. There was another knock, this time louder. Alex sighed, muttering under his breath. This is gonna be a problem. Chapter 13, A Soul Laid Bare. The living room buzzed with an odd mixture of energy and tension. In one corner, Green Lantern Hal Jordan sat cross-legged on the floor, playing with James and the supposed toy dinosaur. The mech-hazard-inspired Dino moved with an unsettling fluidity, reacting to James's movements almost too perfectly, as if it had a mind of its own. James, of course, was completely oblivious to this and was having the time of his life, giggling as Hal conjured up constructs of alien creatures to battle the metal Dino. Across the room, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. Seated around the dining table were John Constantine, Raven, and Batman, their expressions ranging from amused to unreadable. Margaret sat nearby, her hands gripping her chair tightly, her gaze flickering between Alex and the newcomers with nervous confusion. Alex, on the other hand, looked aggravated as hell. His eyes locked onto Batman, and his voice dripped with accusation as he muttered, You went to the window on purpose to get James to squeal, didn't you? John chuckled, clearly entertained, while Batman simply responded in his usual deadpan tone, It was a coincidence. Alex didn't believe that for a second. Margaret sat quietly, eating the meal Alex had made, though it was clear from the slight tremble in her hands that she was unsettled. After a long moment of silence, she finally spoke, her voice hesitant. Did I, or Alex, do something wrong? She asked, her fingers tightening around her fork. I am sure Alex didn't do anything bad, did he? John, ever the charmer, waved a hand dismissively and leaned back in his chair. Of course not, love, he assured her. It's just that Alex here has abilities I'm sure he hasn't quite told you about yet. Margaret turned to Alex, her expression searching. Alex let out a deep sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. I was gonna tell you eventually, he admitted. I just didn't know how you'd take it. Before Margaret could respond, a familiar sound cut through the tension. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it, expecting a normal notification, but as soon as she looked at the screen, her eyes widened. The same distorted voice that had once given her information about Robert's experiments spoke once again. Heya, Margaret. Long time no see. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Alex, realization dawning over her. Wait, that was you, she whispered. You were the one who gave me the info. Alex nodded, eyes steady. Yeah. Margaret swallowed, but her shock only deepened when Alex continued. Oh, and, remember that Hulk that helped Superman out a while back, he said casually. Margaret blinked. Her fork nearly slipped from her fingers. That was you. Alex exhaled through his nose, giving her a lopsided shrug. Margaret stared at him, her mind racing as she tried to process everything. This entire time, the person she had trusted, the one who had looked out for her and James, was secretly capable of standing toe-to-toe with Superman. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, Margaret smiled. I still love you, Alex, she said softly. Alex felt something in his chest loosen, like a weight he hadn't even realized was there had suddenly lifted. Margaret shook her head playfully. Just, tell me sooner next time, okay? Alex chuckled, relief washing over him as he gave her a small, grateful smile. Then, his attention snapped back to the three sitting across from him. His expression hardened again. All right, out with it, he said, leaning back in his chair. You didn't just come here to expose me, so what else? Batman, ever the pragmatic one, wasted no time. We need to look into your soul, he stated bluntly. We've been encountering problems. You might be connected. John, ever one to cut straight to the point, added, to be real with you, mate, we want to check if all this power is safe within you and maybe even figure out if there's a limit to what you can do. And yes, there is an actual problem. Alex raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Oh? So you want to see if I'll go off the deep end and start throwing planets around, hey? John smirked. Something like that. Raven, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. This isn't a joke, Alex. Her dark eyes locked onto his. If there's something corrupting your soul, we need to know now before it's too late. Alex held her gaze for a long moment before finally sighing. Well. He spread his arms out. What are you waiting for? I'm ready for some soul investigation. As soon as the words left his mouth, the atmosphere shifted. The room's temperature seemed to drop as Raven, John, and Batman closed their eyes in unison. A faint, mystical energy began to radiate from them, washing over the room like a slow-moving tide. Alex felt something pulling at him, a sensation that was both foreign and strangely familiar, as if someone was gently peeling back layers of himself. His own eyes began to close on instinct, and the moment they did, the world around them faded. Meanwhile, in the background, Margaret turned away from the table and joined Hal and James, who were still enthusiastically playing with the dinosaur. James barely even noticed the strange shift in the air as he made pew-pew noises, commanding his dino to charge at one of Hal's light constructs. Margaret, however, stole one last glance at Alex. Then forced herself to look away, trying to pretend that nothing was happening. She had faith in him. She had to. Chapter 14, The Hall of Possibilities. A surreal expanse stretched in every direction, a creamy rainbow swirling across the sky and ground. It wasn't just a single gradient of colors, it was every color imaginable, seamlessly blending into one another. Shades of pink, black, white, and brown pulsed like a living organism, as if the very essence of existence itself had decided to settle within his soul. Alex took a step forward, his foot touching down on something solid yet intangible, like walking on hardened light. He glanced around, his gaze quickly landing on three familiar figures: Raven, John Constantine, and Batman, who were hunched over, searching for something. Frowning, Alex approached them. What are you guys looking for? He asked. Batman, still focused on whatever they were examining, responded in his usual gruff monotone. We're trying to find a window. Something to exit your soul. Alex blinked. You're telling me I've trapped you all in here? John smirked and shook his head. Not quite, mate. A soul is normally one color at most, it has different shades of the same spectrum. But yours. He gestured around them. It's all of them. Every single bloody color you could think of. Alex rubbed his chin. So, what does that mean? That I have a weird soul. John chuckled. That's an understatement. Before Alex could ask another question, Raven suddenly spoke up. Found it, she said, her voice quiet but firm. But, you might want to see this. The three of them turned toward her as she gestured ahead. A hallway had appeared. The moment they stepped inside, the ground beneath them solidified. Unlike the swirling chaos outside, the hallway felt stable, almost, too real. The walls were lined with statues, each one carved in intricate detail, stretching as far as the eye could see. They walked in silence, their eyes scanning the figures as they passed. Some statues were indescribable horrors, eldritch beings with too many eyes, mouths in the wrong places, and limbs that twisted in ways that defied logic. Others were gods, standing tall with divine auras that radiated raw power. And then there were the humans, ordinary men and women frozen in stone, their expressions a mixture of calm, rage, sorrow, and peace. The deeper they walked, the more overwhelming it became. The sheer variety of forms, the sheer infinity of what lay ahead, it felt like they could walk forever and still not reach the end. John, never one to let eerie silence linger too long, let out a low whistle. What the bloody hell is this? He muttered, eyeing a particularly nightmarish statue of a beast with 6 wings, 3 heads, and a shifting form that made it painful to look at. Before he could go on another philosophical tangent, Alex cut him off. I get it now, he murmured. The three of them turned to him. Alex exhaled and gestured toward the never-ending hall. This is what I can turn into. A beat of silence. Batman glanced ahead, his eyes narrowing slightly before he gave a firm nod. That makes sense. John ran a hand through his hair. Well, that's unsettling. Raven simply remained quiet, her gaze unreadable. Then, without another word, she raised a hand and with a gentle flick of her fingers, the world around them shattered. Back to reality. Alex's eyes snapped open as he was pulled back into the real world. The strange weight of the soulscape faded, replaced by the familiar warmth of Margaret's living room. Batman was already standing up, adjusting his cape as he moved toward the door. Without looking back, he simply stated, "Thank you for the hospitality, Margaret." And with that, he left. John stretched his arms with a dramatic groan before flashing a smirk. Well, that was one hell of a field trip. He gave Margaret a nod. Thanks for the meal, love. Raven, as always, said little, merely offering Alex one last glance before she and John followed Batman out. Hal, who had been playing with James this entire time, ruffled the kid's hair before standing up. See you next time, kid, he said with a wink. James beamed, waving excitedly as Hal left. As the door clicked shut, the house finally fell into peaceful silence. Alex let out a long, tired sigh, rubbing the back of his head. Well, he muttered, that was a lot. Margaret, who had been watching him carefully, gave him a soft smile. Want to make some cake? She asked. Alex blinked at her before chuckling. I was just about to ask if you wanted something to eat. Margaret giggled. Cake sounds perfect. And just like that, the tension in the air melted away. For now, at least. Chapter 15, A Troubling Revelation. The watchtower loomed in the vastness of space, an impenetrable fortress of justice, orbiting Earth like a silent guardian. Inside, Batman sat at a dimly lit console, his cowl shadowing his expression as his fingers moved methodically across the holographic keyboard. Screens flickered before him, displaying footage of Alex, his transformations, his battles, and his unbelievable feats of power. One screen showed Alex as the Hulk, his green form radiating raw, unfiltered strength as he hurled an Amazo unit into orbit like it weighed nothing. Another screen replayed the events inside his soulscape, courtesy of Raven, highlighting the moment Batman, Constantine, and Raven walked through that eerie, never-ending hall of statues. But what caught Batman's focus the most was the frame frozen on one particular image. A colossal gold and white entity with a massive, glowing wheel behind it. A being of legend, revered as the creator of entire universes. Arceus. At least according to Pokémon where it's from. What the hell am I looking at? The voice came from Barry Allen, aka The Flash, who had entered unnoticed and now stood with a cocked eyebrow, staring at the screen over Batman's shoulder. Are you secretly a comic and anime fan, Bats? Barry asked with a teasing grin. Batman, unfazed, turned slightly in his chair and responded in his gravelly monotone. I saw this, in the man's soul. Barry blinked. Wait. What? Batman gestured toward the image of Arceus before pulling up another screen, this time showing Alex walking through the hall of possibilities inside his soul. The sheer variety of beings lining the walls was terrifying. Eldritch horrors, deities, monsters beyond comprehension. Barry glanced between the footage and Batman's serious expression. Then, slowly, his gaze returned to the screen showing Arceus. You're serious? He asked. Batman nodded. Dead serious. Barry ran a hand through his hair, looking back at another screen replaying Alex's Hulk transformation. He muttered, first he turns into the Hulk and launches an Amazo into space, and now you're telling me he might be able to turn into a literal god. Before Batman could answer, a new voice entered the conversation. I got the other creatures related to what you saw. Both turned to see Cyborg walking over, his cybernetic eye glowing as he projected a holographic list in front of them. Based on what I could cross-reference with our databases and various mythological, extraterrestrial, and fictional sources, it's not good. The holographic screen flickered to life, displaying a rotating gallery of horrors. 1. The Death Angels, A Quiet Place. Cyborg swiped to the first entity, a monstrous blind creature with razor-sharp exoskeletons and inhuman speed. Their hunting method relied solely on sound, their durability rivaling metahumans and their lethality being off the charts. These things wiped out most of humanity in an alternate universe. They can hear a pin drop from miles away and react instantly. Flash grimaced. Great, so he might have hyper-predator instincts. 2. The Xenomorph, Alien Franchise. The next entity rotated into view, a tall, sleek, black exoskeletal horror, its elongated skull gleaming under the light, its inner jaw twitching. Xenomorphs, Cyborg said. You know, the acid-blooded nightmare fuel. Perfect killing machines. If Alex has this in his arsenal, he could theoretically use their rapid adaptability, durability, and hive-mind coordination. Barry whistled. So, potential face-hugging, acid-blooded, super-adaptive nightmare powers. Lovely. 3. SCP-682, the Immortal Reptile. Cyborg swiped again, and this time, even Batman's eyes narrowed. The next figure was massive, a monstrous reptilian entity covered in thick, bone-plated armor. Its body looked mangled yet alive, its jagged mouth filled with razor-sharp fangs. SCP-682, Cyborg muttered. A near-indestructible, highly intelligent apex predator. This thing hates all life and is almost impossible to kill. Flash tensed. You're telling me Alex has something like this in his soul? Cyborg shook his head. Not just has it, if the pattern holds, he might be able to replicate its abilities. Batman's expression darkened. If Alex truly had the potential to turn into 682, that meant he could survive almost anything. 4. Pennywise, IT. The next image displayed a grinning, monstrous clown, its yellow eyes glowing ominously. Barry took several steps back. Nope. Nope. Hell nope. Cyborg sighed. Yeah, Pennywise. Interdimensional nightmare fuel. Feeds on fear. Can shape reality, distort perceptions, and is damn near immortal unless you completely destroy its essence. Barry groaned. First immortal lizard demons, now evil space clowns. 5. Reverse Flash, Eobard. Cyborg hesitated before pulling up the last image. A red-eyed, yellow-suited speedster sneered back at them. Eobard, the Reverse Flash. And that's when Flash froze. His heartbeat quickened as he stared at the image. His mouth opened, but for a moment, no words came out. Wait. His voice was quieter now. You're telling me he can do what now? Batman leaned forward. He turned into Thawne once. Silence. Barry slowly turned to face Batman, his eyes slightly widened in what could only be described as horrified realization. You're telling me this guy didn't just turn into the Hulk, but he also turned into my worst enemy? Batman gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes. Barry exhaled sharply, trying to process this information. If Alex could replicate Thawne's abilities, his speed, his time-traveling capabilities, his ability to manipulate the Speed Force itself. Then they had two possibilities. Either Alex was going to be one of the greatest threats they'd ever face. Or he was going to be one of their most powerful allies. And they needed to ensure it was the latter. Barry finally spoke, his voice serious. Okay, so, what now? Batman's gaze didn't waver. We watch. We monitor. And, if necessary. He exhaled. We intervene. Cyborg crossed his arms. And if we can't stop him? Batman was silent for a moment before he turned back to the screen, his expression grim. Then we hope he chooses to be on our side. Chapter 16, Babysitting, Bots, and Blinds. Alex sat on the couch, watching over James, who was busy playing with his custom-built robot companion, a small, sleek, metallic creature resembling a hybrid of Upgrade from Ben 10 and Rex Salazar's Nanite constructs. The little bot had a chrome-black exterior, a glowing blue eye, and the ability to shift parts of its body into tools, much like Upgrade or Rex's metallic appendages. James, of course, had decided to call it Rex. Alex smirked as James commanded the bot, which was currently morphing its hands into tiny drill bits and pretending to dig into an invisible wall. Rex, activate super mode. James shouted, jumping excitedly as the bot shifted its hands into energy blasters and made a few rapid pew-pew sounds. The bot obeyed with fluid precision, its body shifting seamlessly, something only possible because of the small arc reactor Alex had integrated into its system, along with a piece of a galvanic mechamorph he had acquired. The thing about galvanic mechamorphs, like Upgrade, was that they were sentient, even if they split off into fragments. Normally, any piece separated from a mechamorph would develop its own consciousness, but Alex's transformations worked differently. When Alex created something from his own essence, it remained an extension of himself. Each split-off could develop its own characteristics, sure, but they weren't truly independent. Take Glitch Trap, for example. A separate copy of Alex had merged with Margaret's phone, taking on the twisted digital form of Glitch Trap from Five Nights at Freddy's. Luckily, since it was still a part of Alex, it wasn't completely unhinged, just a little mischievous with the occasional eerie laugh. Alex shuddered to think what would happen if he merged with someone like Michael Myers or any other pure psychopath. It wasn't just about taking on their form, it was about the traits that bled through. Of course it was purely optional to experience them. That was something he had to be careful about. As Alex relaxed on the couch, keeping an eye on James, something caught his attention. A faint shift outside the window. To the average person, it would have been invisible. The spies were good, exceptionally so, hidden in the shadows, using the environment to blend in. But Alex wasn't average. His enhanced senses, combined with his ability to perceive things on a higher level, allowed him to spot the faintest movements, the flicker of a shadow that didn't quite belong, the unnatural stillness of a supposedly normal pedestrian. He saw them. He didn't know who they were working for, whether they were government agents, mercenaries, or something worse, but they were watching. Instead of panicking, Alex simply smirked. He raised a hand and waved at them. The reaction was instant. One of the spies stiffened slightly. Another adjusted their earpiece, probably reporting to their superior that they had been made. Alex chuckled, reaching for the blinds. Not today, boys. With a smooth motion, he closed them, blocking their view inside. Turning back, he found James still playing with Rex, completely oblivious to the outside world. Hey, kid, Alex called out. You hungry? James perked up immediately, his eyes lighting up. Chicken parm. Chicken parm. Chicken parm, he chanted, hopping up and down excitedly. Alex laughed. All right, chicken parm it is. Alex moved into the kitchen, grabbing ingredients while Rex followed behind, shifting its body into a tiny chef's hat and a mini spatula. James giggled. Rex wants to help cook. Alex smirked. All right, little buddy. You can stir the sauce. As he got to work, he let his mind wander. The spies outside were a problem, but not an immediate one. If they were observing, that meant they hadn't decided to act yet. But why? Are they trying to assess my threat level? Are they waiting for orders? It was a matter of when, not if, they would make a move. His fingers moved automatically, chopping ingredients with inhuman precision. His mind was split half on the food, half on the situation. He wasn't scared. If anything, he was curious. Who exactly was interested in him? Government agencies like Argus? The Deo? Maybe even Cadmus? Or was it someone worse? As he pondered, James tugged his sleeve. Alex. I want to help. Alex glanced down and smiled. All right, kiddo. You can mix the cheese. James eagerly took a bowl of shredded mozzarella and stirred it with his hands, giggling as Rex copied his movements, morphing its hands into little cheese scoopers. Alex let the moment ground him. Whatever was coming, he'd deal with it. Right now? It was just him, James, and some damn good chicken parmesan. After dinner, Alex put James to bed, making sure he was tucked in with his favorite stuffed animal, which, unsurprisingly, was a tiny robot plush. As he turned off the light and walked back to the living room, his mind returned to the spies outside. He pulled back a single blind, peering into the night. Gone. No sign of them. But he knew better. They weren't gone. Just watching from a better angle. He sighed, leaning against the window. All right, then. Let's see who'll make the first move. Margaret had left him in charge of James for the night. It was his job to keep the kid safe. Which meant, whoever was out there, if they made a wrong move, they were going to find out real fast that Alex wasn't someone to mess with. And if they tried to take James or Margaret, well, then they'd get a first-hand look at what happened when someone pushed a shapeshifter too far. Chapter 17, Shadows of the Future. Cadmus Cloning Facility, the basement. The air was sterile, the hum of machines echoing off the metallic walls as Amanda Waller strode through the restricted corridors of Cadmus. The heavy reinforced doors hissed open, revealing the cloning facility, a sprawling underground laboratory filled with biopods containing humanoid figures suspended in viscous blue liquid. At the center of it all stood Lex Luthor, arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. His gaze was locked onto one of the central cloning chambers, its contents obscured by the thick cryonic mist that had yet to fully clear. Waller didn't waste time. "What is it this time, Luthor?" she asked, voice sharp. "I was in the middle of another Task Force X meeting." Lex turned toward her, his smile widening. "We've done it." For a moment, Waller was silent. Then, her eyes narrowed, her mind catching up to what he meant. "It worked?" she asked, a glint of interest flashing across her usually stoic expression. Lex gave a slow nod. "And how did you manage to pull it off so quickly?" Lex turned back to the cloning pods, stepping toward the largest one at the room's center. "We degraded our only sample of Alex's DNA but enough to make it stable." Waller's brow arched slightly. "And then?" Lex's eyes gleamed with something between arrogance and triumph. "We discovered that even degraded it still retains its transformative properties, albeit barely. So all we had to do was mix it into the cloning process with Kryptonian DNA," Waller finished, a slow smile spreading across her face. Lex chuckled. "Exactly." They turned as scientists and technicians moved around them, carefully monitoring holographic readouts displaying the clone's vital signs. Suspended in the pod, the figure remained obscured, but its silhouette was unmistakable, broad-shouldered, Kryptonian frame, yet with subtle differences that hinted at Alex's unique genetic signature. The second Superman. Their plan had just been accelerated exponentially. Central City. The city streets blurred, streaks of red and yellow lightning illuminating the skyline as two speedsters raced through the city at impossible speeds. Barry Allen the Flash kept pace, his focus locked on his opponent. Ronald Thawne, another Reverse Flash, had appeared out of nowhere, demanding answers about his speed force being replicated. The confrontation had escalated instantly. Buildings shook as they moved at speeds far beyond the comprehension of ordinary humans. Glass shattered, and the very air distorted from the sheer energy radiating off their conflict. "You think I care about whatever mess you're dealing with?" Barry shouted, dodging a vibrating strike aimed at his chest. "You show up, talking about someone stealing your speed force, and expect me to care." Ronald gritted his teeth, narrowly avoiding one of Barry's lightning-laced punches. "You should care, Alan," he growled, his movements erratic, desperate. "Someone or something is blocking time travel. I can't go back." Barry hesitated. That was concerning. The Reverse Flash's whole existence was centered around messing with time, yet now he was trapped in the present. "What the hell are you talking about?" Barry asked, dodging another strike. Thawne skidded to a stop atop a skyscraper, looking out over the city, his expression twisted with frustration. Barry followed, standing a few feet away, still ready for a fight. "For the last 20 years, Thawne muttered, every time I try to travel past a certain point in history, I hit a wall. I thought it was a fluke, a mistake, but it's constant." Barry frowned. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he admitted. "And honestly, I don't even know if I want to. But..." He crossed his arms. "I do know who might have used your speed force." Thawne's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Barry smirked. "A guy named Alex." Thawne's expression darkened. He had heard that name before. Whispers. Rumors. Someone unnatural. "Is he the reason I'm stuck?" he muttered, almost to himself. Barry shook his head. "No clue. But if even you are blocked from time travel, I don't think he's the one pulling the strings." Thawne clenched his fists. Everything was wrong. He needed to figure out who or what was behind this. For now, though, he had no answers. His red lightning flashed, and in the next second he was gone. Barry exhaled. Yet. That's not terrifying at all. Cadmus, cloning chamber. Back at Cadmus, the process neared completion. Lex and Waller stood in front of the main cloning pod, the mist beginning to dissipate. The figure inside became clearer, muscular, Kryptonian physique, but with something more. Something unstable. One of the scientists glanced at them, nervous. "The subject is..." A loud crack cut through the room as the clone's eyes snapped open. Glowing red. A warning alarm blared as the biopod's glass fractured. Lex smirked. Waller simply watched, her expression unreadable. The second Superman had arrived. Chapter 18, A Birthday, A Claw Machine, and A Speedster's Arrival. League Pizza, March 3rd. The warm scent of freshly baked pizza filled the air as Alex, Margaret, and James stepped into League Pizza, a popular hero-themed pizzeria in the heart of the city. It was a special day, James's birthday, and Alex had made sure it would be one to remember. The walls were decorated with comic-style murals of heroes and villains mid-battle, and the restaurant buzzed with energy as families and children crowded the booths. James, barely able to contain his excitement, practically bounced in place, tugging at Alex's sleeve. "Hurry, hurry. Everyone's here already." Alex chuckled, ruffling the kid's hair. "Relax, birthday boy. You'll have plenty of time to eat your weight in pizza." Margaret, walking beside them, smiled warmly. "You sure you didn't forget anything?" "Nope," Alex replied confidently. "I sent the invites, made sure everyone's pizza is covered," and he patted his pocket. "I've got my secret weapon." Margaret raised an eyebrow. Which is? Alex grinned. Mastery of the claw machine. James gasped. Yes. That means I get the first plush, right? Obviously, Alex said. Birthday kid gets first pick. Margaret laughed softly, shaking her head. You spoil him. Of course I do. It's his day. They made their way inside, greeted by the sight of half the kids in James's class already gathered around a large reserved table. The energy was contagious: laughter, excited chatter, and the sight of giant pizzas being brought out. Alex had split the costs with Margaret despite her protests that she should cover it all, but they compromised. They both paid half. After all, no one was going to argue about free pizza. The best claw machine player ever. As everyone dug into the Martian Meat Lovers special, Alex slipped away toward the claw machine, an old but well-stocked contraption filled with stuffed superheroes, aliens, and cute creatures. All right, kids, he called out, catching their attention. One toy each. You pick, and I get it for you. Guaranteed. The kids gasped. Some of the adults watching scoffed, and a few parents even muttered, yeah, sure. The first kid, a boy with glasses, pointed at a Superman plush buried in the corner. Alex cracked his knuckles, moved the joystick with precision, and dropped the claw exactly in place. With a smooth motion, it clamped down perfectly on the plush, lifting it up without issue and depositing it in the prize slot. The boy's jaw dropped. No way. Next. Alex asked, smirking. One by one, the kids picked their prizes, and Alex won every single time. Even the adults were shocked. Is it rigged for him? One father muttered. No, I think he's just that good, a mother responded, watching in disbelief. Meanwhile, in the corner, a small group of women had gathered, whispering to Margaret. He's young and handsome, one of them said, nudging her. Where did you find him? Margaret, who had been enjoying the evening, rolled her eyes but smiled. I ordered from his Quick Mart for 4 years, she explained. We always got on each other's nerves, but when I found out I was being cheated on, he helped me. The women murmured in surprise, exchanging knowing looks. That's when I realized. Margaret continued, resting a hand on her slightly growing belly, I was lucky to have him. There was a brief silence before one of the women smiled and said, you got yourself a good one. Margaret glanced at Alex, who was still entertaining the kids, and smiled softly. Yeah. I did. As the evening wound down and the kids were getting sleepy from all the pizza, Alex sat at a side table, enjoying a moment of peace. That's when he noticed a man approaching. His steps were casual, his smile friendly, but Alex immediately knew better. The disguise was flawless, but Alex could see past it. Harrison Wells, the man greeted, sliding into the seat across from him. Alex leaned back, crossing his arms. That's an interesting alias. The man chuckled. Oh, you know how it is. Gotta blend in. Alex stared at him. I don't know why you're here, but I do know you're not some old friend. The man's eyes glowed faintly red for a split second before his smirk widened. Clever, he said. But you already knew that, didn't you? Alex's expression didn't change. Let's stop playing games, Thon. The disguise flickered briefly, and Alex finally saw Eobard Thon, the Reverse Flash, staring back at him. I don't know why you're here, Alex continued, his tone even, but if you're looking for a fight, now's not the time. Thon rested his hands on the table, his smirk fading slightly. Oh, I'm not here to fight, he admitted. I just have a question. Alex gestured for him to continue. Thon's expression darkened. You used my force sometime in the last few months. The air between them grew tense. Alex tilted his head slightly, not denying it. Thon leaned forward. You don't just use the speed force without me noticing. And more importantly, his voice lowered, eyes narrowing, you don't use my speed force without consequences. Alex chuckled. Is that what this is about? You're upset someone dipped into your special little power source. Thon's jaw tightened. You don't understand what you're messing with. Alex studied him for a moment before grinning. Well, if the great Reverse Flash is that stressed out about it, he said, waving a hand toward the pizza still on the table, maybe we should talk it out over some Martian pizza. Thon blinked. Then scowled. You're not slick or funny. Alex's grin widened. Maybe not, but I do know you want some pizza. Thon hesitated for a moment before sighing. All right, he muttered. I would like some pizza. And some answers. Alex gestured for a waiter, signaling for another slice. Then let's eat, Professor, he said. This should be fun. To be continued. Chapter 19, A Tempting Offer and a Speedster's Resolve. The night air carried a cool breeze as families and children left League Pizza, their laughter and chatter fading into the background. The arcade machines dimmed, and the last of the staff cleaned up, signaling the end of another busy evening. Many of the kids had tried their luck with the claw machine after watching Alex dominate it, and a few lucky ones had walked away with extra plush toys, much to their delight. But now, the party was over, and it was time to head home. Margaret yawned, stretching her arms. That was a good night. James, still holding tightly onto his Superman plush, nodded sleepily. Best birthday ever. Alex smiled, kneeling down to ruffle the kid's hair. Glad you had fun, birthday boy. Margaret reached for her purse, but Alex stopped her. I got the cab, he said. You two get home safely. Margaret frowned slightly, glancing between Alex and the man still sitting at the booth. Harrison Wells, or rather, Eobert Thawne. You sure? She asked quietly. Alex nodded. Yeah. I just need to have a quick chat with an old friend. Margaret didn't like it. She wasn't stupid. She knew something was off about this Wells guy. But she also knew Alex wouldn't be reckless. All right, she relented, taking James by the hand. Come on, buddy, let's get home. James yawned again, barely acknowledging what was happening as Margaret led him toward the waiting cab. Alex watched them go, waiting until they were out of sight before turning back to Thawne, who was staring at the table in thought. Then, out of nowhere, Thawne spoke. Around 21 years. Alex blinked. What? Thawne looked up, his red eyes faintly glowing. It's been around 21 years since I lost the ability to go back, he clarified. And even now, I can't move forward into the future without serious repercussions. Alex exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He already knew why. It was because of him. Alex had been in this world for 20 years and 9 months. And the womb wasn't non-existent. His mother had carried him, which meant he had existed here, whether he wanted to or not. And because of that, Thawne's timeline had been thrown into disarray. It's because of me, isn't it? Alex muttered. Thawne smirked faintly. You catch on fast. Silence hung between them for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling in. Then, Alex spoke. If I could restore your connection to the future, let you travel like you used to, would you take it? Thawne's red eyes narrowed as he studied Alex's face. Either Alex was a master manipulator or he was being completely genuine. What's the price? Thawne asked cautiously. Alex shrugged. None for you. Thawne's eyes flickered with suspicion. Alex leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. But there would be possible repercussions for me. The Reverse Flash stared at him, waiting for the trick. But there wasn't one. Why? Thawne finally asked. Why would you do that? You're aware of what I've done, what I do. You're not naive. So why? Alex sighed. Because I know what it's like to be stuck in a place you don't belong. Thawne said nothing, but his expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Alex continued, I could force my way through life, take shortcuts, cheat, but I won't. If I rely too much on power, I become dependent on it. And when that power is taken away, I'm nothing. And besides, I've seen what happens when you abuse a power. Thawne scoffed. That's a noble way of saying you're afraid of what could happen. Alex shook his head. No. I'm just smart enough to know my limits. For a brief moment, genuine silence fell over them. Thawne tapped his fingers against the table, clearly deep in thought. Then, suddenly, he stood up. I'm not looking for pity, Thawne said, his voice quiet but firm. Your offer is tempting, Alex. But... He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I've always been alone, he admitted. And that's how I'll continue. On my own. And with that, the air around him crackled with red lightning. Alex barely had time to react before Thawne vanished, disappearing in a scarlet blur, leaving only the faint scent of ozone behind. Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. Figures, he muttered. With Thawne gone, Alex finally turned toward home, his pace calm and steady. The night was quiet now, the city streets dimly lit by streetlights. He walked past familiar buildings, familiar signs, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting. Thawne's presence here wasn't random. And while Alex had extended an offer, he knew it wasn't the last time they'd cross paths. Finally, he reached the house. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the warmth of the living room lights and the faint sound of a TV playing softly in the background. Margaret was sitting on the couch, a blanket draped over her as she sipped from a cup of tea. James had already fallen asleep, curled up with his new plus highs. Alex smiled slightly at the sight before stepping further inside. Margaret glanced up at him, her expression searching. Everything okay? Alex nodded, sitting down beside her. For now, he said. Hopefully, my peace will last. Margaret hummed, sipping her tea. Hopefully. And for a moment, everything was quiet. But in the back of his mind, Alex knew. Things were only just beginning. Chapter 20, The Devil You Don't See. The dim light of the apartment cast long shadows across the walls. The air was still, too still, as Alex sat across from his unexpected guest, someone he never thought he'd run into. James Gordon Jr. A name that sent chills down the spine of anyone who knew him. The son of James Gordon, commissioner of the Gotham City Police Department, but unlike his father, James Jr. was anything but noble. He was a psychopath, a manipulative, remorseless killer who had somehow managed to slip through the cracks of the justice system. And now, he was sitting in Alex's apartment, a casual smirk on his face as he set down 2 cups of tea. Thought we could have a chat, James said smoothly, pushing one of the cups toward Alex. Alex didn't touch it. Instead, he kept his gaze locked onto the man in front of him, analyzing him. Every twitch, every micro-expression, every movement. James Jr. was dangerous not because he was powerful, but because he was unpredictable. And in Alex's experience, those were the worst kinds of people. Then, James slid something across the table. A card. Alex glanced down, his eyes narrowing. The Deo. Great. Just great. So that's where he ended up. The Department of Extranormal Operations, a U.S. government agency that investigated and processed meta-human activities and individuals. More importantly, it was tasked with finding ways to neutralize and counteract meta-human threats. And according to the card, James Gordon Jr. was the head of strategic planning for dealing with those threats. Alex exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral. You work for the DAO, he asked, voice calm. James smiled. I prefer to say they work for me. Of course he did. Alex leaned back, arms crossed. So? What do you want? James steepled his fingers, tilting his head slightly. A smart man like you already knows, he said. I want you. Alex's brow twitched. Not interested. James chuckled. You don't even know what I'm offering. I don't care, Alex replied flatly. But James wasn't deterred. He leaned forward slightly. You're not just some meta, Alex. You're special. We've been watching you for a while now. Of course they had. James continued, you have skills, intelligence, power. Power that could be put to good use, power that could help humanity. Alex scoffed. Oh, is that what this is? A recruitment pitch. James grinned. Think of it as an opportunity. Pass. James's grin faltered, just slightly. Alex could see at the moment his patience thinned. You sure? James asked, voice softer now. Because I'd hate for anything unfortunate to happen. There it was. The real reason James was here. Alex's entire body tensed as James leaned in even closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. You wouldn't want Margaret or little James getting caught in the crossfire, would you? Silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, Alex stood up. James's smirk widened as he stood as well. But when their eyes met, something changed. Alex's gaze darkened. His pupils dilated, and something else surfaced. A shift in the air. A presence that wasn't there before. Then, without warning, Alex's entire form changed. His body expanded. His muscles contorted. His clothes blackened, becoming mainly leather, and his veins pulsed with an unnatural glow. James barely had time to react before Alex tackled him, sending them both crashing into the wall. James grunted as Alex grabbed his throat, lifting him off the ground with ease. For the first time James Jr. wasn't smiling. Alex's voice was low, rumbling, filled with barely restrained fury. Oh, I wish I could kill you, James. James struggled, clawing at Alex's grip, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Alex tightened his hold. You deserve it, he growled. So much. After everything you've done. James's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Then, Alex grinned. But no. And suddenly, James froze. I'm going to do something much worse. A beat of silence. Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. Remember this, James. James's breathing hitched. I'm not Batman, Alex said, his grip tightening. I'm not the Joker. And then, with the voice dripping in dark amusement. But I could swing to either of them so quickly. The room seemed colder now. Then. Neutralize him. James screamed. The door burst open as black-suited agents flooded in. Alex barely even looked at them. And then. His head erupted into flames. James let out a guttural shriek as the Ghost Rider stared into his soul. Alex's voice was no longer his own. I'm going to make you witness and feel every atrocity you've ever committed. James gasped, his pupils dilating as the penance stare took hold. Flashes of his crimes burned into his vision. Every single one. His victims. Their pain. Their terror. The screams, the blood, the hopelessness. And worst of all? He felt it. All of it. Every ounce of suffering he had ever inflicted multiplied tenfold. James Gordon Jr. screamed. The DAO agents opened fire, but the bullets melted before they even touched Alex. He ignored them. Instead, he picked up a device from his pocket. A leak communicator. A direct line to Superman. Alex held it up to his mouth, his voice dark, gravelly, inhuman. Hey, Supes. A pause. Then. Alex here. Call Batman. I'm sure he'd love to see who I just found. And as James convulsed in his grasp, his mind shattered from the torment of his own sins. Alex grinned. Because this was only the beginning of a long punishment. Chapter 21, A Fitting Punishment. A harsh wind cut across the rooftop of the Gotham City Police Department, its chill biting through the night. The city below was restless, neon lights flickering, sirens wailing in the distance, but up here, in the cold, there was only silence. Until a body hit the rooftop with a heavy thud. James Gordon Jr. rolled onto his back, convulsing, his breath ragged and uneven. His eyes were wild, unfocused, as if he were trapped in some invisible nightmare. A shadow loomed over him. Commissioner James Gordon took a step forward, his boots grinding against the rooftop gravel. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled into fists as he stared down at the pathetic, broken thing in front of him. His son. His own blood. But he felt no sympathy. No pity. No remorse. Not after everything James Jr. had done. Not after the bodies he had left behind, the innocents he had destroyed, the monsters he had created. Gordon's face twisted in pure rage, and before he could stop himself, he stomped on James's chest. Hard. James gasped, his body spasming under the force of the blow. You're repenting now. Gordon bellowed, his voice booming across the rooftop. His breath came in short, furious bursts as he stared at the hysterical wreck of a man at his feet. After everything, after all the horrors he had inflicted, now he felt guilty? Now he wanted to cry? After all this, you repent? James Jr. let out a shaking sob, his body writhing as if something invisible was clawing at him. A voice spoke from the side. Not by his own volition. Commissioner Gordon turned to see John Constantine, his trench coat billowing slightly in the wind. He took a long drag from his cigarette before exhaling, the smoke curling into the night air. His soul's been touched by a demon, Constantine continued, looking at James Jr. with a mix of pity and disgust. Or, well, something close enough. He knelt slightly, flicking his cigarette onto the rooftop. He's being forced to relieve every single atrocity he's ever committed over and over and over again. Gordon frowned. And Constantine's expression darkened. And if a glimpse of that is enough to turn this piece of shite into a blubbering wreck, then it must have been pretty damn bad. Silence. Gordon looked down at his son, his former son. James Jr. was whimpering, mumbling to himself, his arms wrapped around his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. Gordon exhaled sharply, then turned to Batman, who had been silent this whole time, standing just a few feet away. So, Gordon muttered, his voice quieter now. Who did this? Batman's cape billowed as he turned toward the rooftop exit. A very helpful shapeshifter. And then, he was gone. The Batcave hours later. The hum of the Batcomputer echoed through the cavern, its glow illuminating Batman's face. The files on the screen were extensive hundreds of documents, reports, classified Deo intelligence. And at the center of it all? James Gordon Jr. Batman's fingers moved swiftly, pulling up everything he could. His arrest records. His trials. His disappearances. His government employment records. And now? A Deo badge, marking him as a high-ranking operative. Batman clenched his fists. This was worse than he thought. The Deo had protected him. Given him power. Used his mind, his psychotic, twisted intelligence to formulate strategies for controlling and eliminating meta-humans. And no one had stopped him. Batman's jaw tightened. Then. His fist slammed down onto the console. The impact sent a sharp echo through the cave. Alfred and Red Hood entered at the sound. Something troubling you, sir? Alfred asked, already knowing the answer. Red Hood or Jason Todd walked closer, his arms crossed. What happened? Batman didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for something on the desk, a small card. A Deo identification badge. Jason's eyes narrowed. Then, Batman pressed a key, pulling up the government files on James Gordon Jr. The screen flooded with data, his employment history, his projects, his experiments. Jason stiffened. His breath hitched. Then, with one swift motion, he kicked a metal trash can, sending it clattering across the cave floor. Are you telling me that scum is back? Jason's voice was filled with unfiltered rage. Batman didn't move. He's been captured. Jason's hands clenched into fists. And? Did you put him in Arkham? Blackgate? Hell, did you even throw him in a deep, dark hole? Batman's eyes flickered with something. Something grim. A fitting punishment has been given. Jason turned toward him fully, searching Batman's face for some kind of explanation, but all he found was silence. A silence thicker than the shadows surrounding them. And as the Batcomputer hummed softly, casting its glow across the cave, one thing became certain. James Gordon Jr. had finally faced justice. And this time? There was no escape. Chapter 22, The Next Step. Cadmus Laboratories deep underground. The dim light of the laboratory flickered against the sterile white walls, illuminating the high-tech facility filled with whirring machines and glowing monitors. Scientists in white coats bustled about, adjusting settings, running diagnostics, and monitoring the figure at the center of the room. A young man, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and short dark hair, stood motionless, dressed in a black jumpsuit adorned with the Cadmus insignia. His name was Alan. And he wasn't just another clone. He was the future. A step beyond Superman. A step beyond Superboy. He was something new. Something more. Alan's eyes flickered across the lab, watching the scientists work. He could feel them studying him, analyzing his every breath, his every movement, as if he were some kind of experiment rather than a person. In a way, they weren't wrong. His existence was manufactured. Controlled. Designed. And yet, he was still human, wasn't he? Or at least something close to it. A set of heavy footsteps echoed through the lab. Alan turned his head slightly as Lex Luthor entered, dressed in a sleek black suit, his signature smirk firmly in place. Behind him, Amanda Waller followed, her arms crossed, her expression sharp and unreadable. Alan, Luthor said smoothly, stopping just a few feet away. How are you feeling? Alan met his gaze. Stronger. Luthor chuckled. That's what I like to hear. Waller, however, remained unimpressed. He's powerful, but he's still unstable, she said, her voice edged with disapproval. We haven't tested the full range of his abilities yet. For all we know, his mutations could be a liability. Luthor waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense. Alan is a miracle. He turned back to the young Kryptonian clone, stepping closer. Tell me, Alan, Luthor said, his voice filled with curiosity, what have you discovered about yourself? Alan's fingers flexed at his sides. My abilities. He furrowed his brow. They aren't fixed like Superman's. They change. Adapt. I can modify my heat vision to be something else entirely. Ice-based. Radioactive. Focused or widespread. Luthor's smile widened. And flight? Strength. All still there, Alan nodded. But my cells shift to prioritize different attributes. If I increase my durability, I lose speed. If I enhance my strength, I have to sacrifice another ability temporarily. Luthor's eyes gleamed. Fascinating. Waller scoffed. And his weakness? Alan's expression darkened. Kryptonite still affects me, he admitted, his voice tight. But it takes longer to weaken me than a pure Kryptonian. Luthor clapped his hands together. See? Improvements already. Waller wasn't convinced. He's still vulnerable. Still a risk. Luthor's smirk didn't waver. Every weapon has flaws, Waller. That doesn't mean they aren't useful. Alan stiffened slightly at the word weapon, but he said nothing. Luthor turned, stepping toward one of the monitors. The screen displayed genetic data and at the very top was a name. Alex. Alan's eyes narrowed at the sight of it. That name keeps coming up, he muttered. Why? Luthor glanced over his shoulder. You wouldn't exist without him, he said simply. Your unique biology, your ability to evolve comes from his DNA. Alan's fingers twitched. So I'm just some offshoot of him. Luthor shook his head. No. You're more. You're the culmination of what we've been working toward for years. You aren't just Superman's successor, you're something beyond him. Beyond Krypton. Alan studied Luthor's expression carefully. You don't want me to be a weapon, he said slowly. You want me to be a symbol. Luthor smiled. Exactly. Waller rolled her eyes. We don't have time for this philosophical nonsense. We have a problem, and his name is Alex. Luthor's expression hardened slightly, though his smirk remained. Yes, Alex is a complication, he admitted. But that doesn't mean we should eliminate him. Waller raised an eyebrow. You're defending him now. I'm being pragmatic, Luthor said smoothly. He's an unknown variable, yes, but he's also the biggest asset we have. Risky or not, he could help bridge humanity's expansion to a universal level. Waller sighed, rubbing her temples. You seriously think you can recruit him? She asked, exasperated. Luthor chuckled. With the right persuasion? I think it's possible. Waller shook her head. And if you're wrong? Luthor's smirk faded slightly. Then we'll adjust accordingly. Waller let out a slow breath. Fine. But if he becomes a problem? Luthor cut her off. Then we handle it. But for now. He turned toward one of the surveillance monitors, watching a live feed of Alex somewhere in the city. For now, we let him be. Then, with the simple press of a button, he deactivated the feeds. All spies are to be pulled away from Alex immediately. Waller's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Luthor turned back to Alan, his expression thoughtful. You, he said, are just the first step. Alan met his gaze. First step to what? Luthor's smirk returned. To something far greater than you could ever imagine. Chapter 23, A Holiday for Everyone. Help me find ways to incorporate some characters. Person with folded hands greatly appreciated. And Ty once again for reading. Underscore 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 un. The warm scent of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air, mixing with the soft sound of giggling as James unwrapped his new Easter bunny plushie. The toy was soft, white with long floppy ears, and its paws clutched a small fabric egg that jingled slightly when shaken. His little hands squeezed the plushie, delight flickering in his bright eyes. Alex watched with a small smile from the kitchen as he finished putting the last touches on a homemade Easter cake. Dressed as none other than Gordon Ramsay, he expertly spread a layer of buttercream frosting over the sponge. The transformation had startled Margaret at first. Seeing the renowned British chef standing in her kitchen was not something she had expected, but given everything she had learned about Alex, it hardly seemed impossible. After all, if Batman was real, and Alex could transform into him, why couldn't he take on the form of a world-class chef? Margaret shook her head as she leaned against the counter, watching him work. You never fail to surprise me, Alex. Alex smirked, his British accent perfectly imitating Ramsay's. You should know by now, Margaret, I aim to impress. He finished the last swirl of frosting before stepping back, admiring his creation. The cake was simple but well-made, fluffy golden layers sandwiched with cream and topped with chocolate shavings and small sugar eggs. James turned his attention from his new plush to the cake, his face lighting up. It looks so good. Alex ruffled the boy's hair, returning to his normal appearance in a blink. Glad you think so, little man. Let's dig in. James eagerly took a seat, while Margaret prepared the plates. Before they could take their first bite, however, there was a knock at the door. Margaret hesitated before walking over to answer it. When she opened the door, Batman stood there, his imposing figure barely fitting into the humble doorway. Behind him, Superman stood with his arms crossed, a calm but watchful expression on his face. Margaret looked between them before stepping aside. Come in. Batman entered first, his gaze immediately locking onto James. His sharp eyes softened for just a second, before returning to his usual stoic demeanor. James, he said, his deep voice softer than usual. Can we talk? Before James could respond, Superman stepped forward, his expression warm. Bats, let them eat first, he suggested, placing a hand on his shoulder. We can talk after. Batman hesitated but eventually gave a small nod. Fine. James, despite the sudden shift in atmosphere, remained cheerful. He carefully cut a slice of cake and offered it to Batman. The room went silent. Margaret stiffened slightly, watching the interaction with interest. Alex leaned against the counter, arms crossed, waiting to see how the Dark Knight would respond to cake, chuckling just a bit. Batman stared at the offered slice, the usually unflinching vigilante caught off guard by the simple act of kindness. Then, to mainly Margaret's shock, Batman smiled just the faintest, smallest upward twitch of his lips as he took the plate. Thank you, James, he said, his voice lower, almost gentle. James beamed. You're welcome. Alex chuckled as he cut another slice and handed it to Superman. Can't have you feeling left out, Big Blue. Superman grinned, accepting it with an appreciative nod. I won't say no to homemade cake. The room settled into a brief moment of peace, the quiet clinking of forks against plates the only sound. Even Batman, known for his near-constant vigilance, allowed himself a few moments to simply sit and eat. Margaret, watching the scene unfold, felt something warm settle in her chest. For a moment, it almost felt normal. And James looked happy. As the plates were cleared and James returned to playing with his plus-highs, Batman turned his attention back to Alex. Thank you, he said at last. Alex raised an eyebrow. For what? For bringing in James Gordon Jr., Batman clarified. Despite your methods, you didn't kill him. Alex leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Death's too easy for people like him. His voice held no malice, only certainty. Scum like him deserve something worse than a quick end. Batman nodded. He understood that sentiment all too well. Alex smirked slightly. Besides, I'd say one of your other enemies would enjoy it way too much. Batman's expression remained unreadable, but there was no mistaking who Alex was referring to. The Joker. The clown prince of crime would have loved to see Alex cross that line to watch him take the life of someone like James Gordon Jr., to prove that even so-called heroes could break. But Alex hadn't. And Batman respected that. With a final glance at James who was still happily playing, Batman stood from his seat, adjusting his cape. One last thing, he said. You've done good here. Alex blinked. He hadn't expected that. Batman didn't wait for a response. With one final nod to Margaret, he turned and headed for the door. Superman, finishing off the last bite of his cake, clapped Alex on the shoulder. You know, you're not as scary as you pretend to be. Alex smirked. Don't let that get around. I've got a non-existent reputation to uphold. Superman chuckled as he followed Batman out. And just like that, the two greatest heroes in the world disappeared into the night. Margaret exhaled, shaking her head with a small laugh. Well, that was something. Alex only grinned. Just another day, Margaret. Just another day. Chapter 24, The Cost of a Reset. The Batcave was darker than usual, the usual coldness amplified by the eerie silence hanging in the air. This wasn't the Batcave Alex had come to associate with Bruce Wayne, no, this was something different. The layout was similar, the shadows deep, the sound of dripping water filling the empty spaces between tense breaths. But the atmosphere? The feeling? It was all wrong. As Alex stood near the massive Batcomputer, he exhaled, his breath steady despite the knowledge weighing on him. He had known something was off since waking up a few hours ago. It wasn't just the air, or the energy of the world, it was a deep-rooted, gut-wrenching instinct clawing at the back of his mind. Then he saw him. Thomas Wayne. The man was older, grizzled, carrying the weight of years of pain in his posture. His Batman suit was different, heavier, lined with red, far more brutal than the one his son wore. The eyes behind the cowl weren't calculating like Bruce's. They were filled with anger, grief, and something else, acceptance. And standing beside him, looking like he had just barely stopped himself from passing out, was Barry Allen. Not just any Barry. Alex's Barry. Flashpoint, Alex muttered under his breath, running a hand down his face as realization sank in. Of course Barry messed with time. How had he not expected this? Barry stiffened. What? Alex let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Nothing. Just, nothing. It all made sense now. The wrongness, the tension, the subtle differences in reality that had been gnawing at him since he woke up in this place. Flashpoint. And that meant this world was a mistake. His eyes flickered toward Thomas, who had been watching him closely, calculating in his own way. You know something, don't you? The older man asked, voice deep and gravely. Alex crossed his arms. More than I'd like. Thomas's eyes narrowed, but before he could press, Alex turned to Barry. I should have seen this coming, he muttered. Especially since it was you. Barry swallowed hard. He didn't even try to deny it. Alex didn't blame him, not entirely. Losing your mother? That was something that could break a man. That did break a man. Barry had power, immense power, and he had used it to fix what was broken in his life. The problem? The cost was everything else. Taking a slow step forward, Alex looked at Thomas. You already know the answer, don't you? The older Wayne's jaw clenched. I want to hear it anyway. Alex inhaled. Bruce. Your son. He became Batman. Thomas's posture didn't change, but the atmosphere in the cave shifted. Barry's eyes widened. Wait, how do you? Alex shot him a look. I know more than you think. The better question is, why wouldn't I know? Barry's lips pressed into a thin line, but Alex didn't stop. When you and your wife died in that alley, Bruce lived, Alex continued, looking directly at Thomas. And that loss shaped him into the man you would have wanted him to be. It's not perfect. Hell, it's painful. But he carries your legacy. Thomas didn't speak. Didn't even move. He was processing. And Alex could see the slight twitch of his fingers, the way his breathing slowed as his mind raced. Then, at last, he gave a small nod. I see. Barry, however, was still reeling. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered, how do you know all this? Alex turned to him, his expression unreadable. Then, after a pause, he simply said. Do you want to be as paranoid as Batman? Barry blinked. Well, no, but wait, am I going to forget all this? Alex's expression hardened slightly. No. But only you. Barry stared at him, mind racing. But before he could speak, Alex exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. Listen, Barry. I really don't want to do this. But frankly. He clenched his fists. I don't have a choice. Barry's heart pounded. What do you mean? Alex's voice dropped to a chilling calm. I'm going to reset time. Silence. Heavy. Thick. Then, barely above a whisper, Thomas spoke. I see. Alex looked at him, his gaze softer than before. I'm sorry. For a long moment, Thomas didn't respond. Then, at last, the older man gave a small nod. It's fine. But then, as Alex turned away, Thomas suddenly spoke again. Wait. Alex paused. I have something for Bruce. The air shifted. Barry glanced between them, silent. Then, without another word, Thomas disappeared deeper into the cave. As soon as he was gone, Barry let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Then he turned to Alex. How do you know so much? Alex smirked slightly. Barry, let me put it this way, there's a reason Bruce keeps tabs on everyone. Barry paled slightly. That's terrifying. Alex's smirk widened. Now you're getting it. Before Barry could respond, Thomas returned. In his hand was a small note, folded neatly. He handed it to Alex. Give this to him. Alex took it carefully, nodding once. Of course. For a moment, nothing was said. Then Alex turned back to Barry. What happened here stays here, he said, voice firm. And you are not allowed to even think about it. Barry, for once, didn't argue. He simply nodded. And then, Alex's body shifted. The air around him distorted, the shadows in the Batcave warping as his very existence seemed to defy reality. His form morphed, stretching into something cosmic, incomprehensible, yet oddly serene. A massive, jet-black form took shape, dotted with shimmering stars across its body. 3 glowing green eyes opened in the darkness of its face, the air itself humming with sheer cosmic authority. Barry stumbled back. Thomas watched, expression unreadable. And as Alien X raised a single hand, his voice echoed across the void. I'm sorry. Then. Everything vanished. A blink. A breath. And suddenly. Alex was alone. Floating. Surrounded by nothing but emptiness. A void. A universe without shape, without sound, without existence. In his hand, the note remained. His fingers curled around it. And as he floated in the nothingness, a single thought echoed in his mind. Barry, you really messed up this time. Chapter 25, The Cost of Imagination. The void was silent. Not the silence of an empty room, nor the quiet of a world at peace. No, this was the kind of silence that came before existence itself, before light, before time, before the very idea of something existing had ever been imagined. Alex floated in it, his form still that of Alien X, his cosmic, star-dotted body a stark contrast to the emptiness surrounding him. His 3 glowing eyes observed everything and nothing at once. And yet, despite the infinite nothingness, he wasn't idle. His mind, his near-omnipotent, cosmic, all-encompassing mind was already at work. Carefully, meticulously, he began to gather the remnants of the world that had been erased. It would be so easy to make it different. To change things. To fix all the mistakes. But that would be wrong. Dangerous. There was an order to things, even within the chaos of existence. If he changed too much, if he made the world into something it was never meant to be, it would no longer be that world. So, instead, Alex did only what was necessary. He reached into the remains of the erased reality, collecting only what was needed, piecing it together exactly as it was meant to be before Barry shattered it. It was like sculpting from memory, each fragment of reality slotting into place like a puzzle with pieces scattered across an infinite sea. His mind worked at speeds beyond human comprehension, his thoughts weaving the very fabric of time and space. It should have felt impossible. And yet, to him, it was merely work. Then, suddenly, he wasn't alone. A presence emerged in the void. Not like the cold, mindless force of destruction. Not like the cosmic entities that sought only balance or survival. No, this was something beyond all of that. Something older. An old man, dressed in a simple suit, a cane in one hand and a worn hat resting atop his head. His eyes held knowledge beyond infinity, a gaze that had seen every creation and destruction that had ever existed. And Alex recognized him instantly. The Presence. The highest being in the DC Omniverse. The one that even the most powerful gods and cosmic entities feared and revered. The one who answered to no one. Except perhaps one even greater. Alex didn't bow, didn't kneel. That wasn't his way. Instead, he stared at the Presence and asked the first question that came to mind. Why was Barry able to go back in time, but not Thawne? The Presence smiled politely, as if pleased by the question. Because Thawne was going to find you and kill you, the old man answered simply. Or at least, he was going to try. Alex's glowing green eyes narrowed slightly. You say that like it would have mattered. It wouldn't have, the Presence admitted. But there was more at stake than just your life. The void rippled slightly as he spoke. You may not know this yet, Alex, the Presence continued, his voice calm yet absolute, but your power is its own being. If you die, it dies. And if it dies, so does all of imagination and freedom. For the first time since entering the void, Alex went silent. He processed the words carefully, his mind still weaving the universe back together even as he considered their meaning. Imagination. Freedom. If he died, they died. Not just in the sense of losing a single concept, but in the most literal, fundamental way. A world without imagination. A world without freedom. What would that even look like? Something inside him twisted at the very idea. The Presence let him sit in that silence, watching as Alex continued his work. Then, after a time, he finally spoke again. Remember the code, Alex. The words were spoken with purpose, as if they carried a weight that only Alex could understand. 3x2, 9yz, 4a equals? Alex's cosmic body froze for a fraction of a second. Then, softly, he answered. I know. The Presence smiled again, a knowing twinkle in his ancient eyes. Good. Then, after a brief pause, he tilted his head slightly. Don't you want to know why you're here? Alex didn't hesitate. No. The Presence raised an eyebrow. No. It's not necessary information, Alex said simply. I'm here. That's all that matters. He turned back toward his work, his cosmic hands shaping the final pieces of reality into place. If I was reborn in this existence, Alex continued, then my purpose is mine to make. Reason or not, I won't be tempted by fate. Then he paused, letting his three glowing eyes settle on the Presence once more. As you technically said, Alex continued, his voice calm, I'm the embodiment of imagination and freedom. The Presence let out a deep, rich laugh. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't arrogant. It was genuine. I like you, the Presence said at last, shaking his head with amusement. Then, with a simple wave of his hand, the rest of the world, the pieces Alex had yet to place, came together instantly. Alex blinked. The universe was complete. The Presence dusted off his suit, as if he had just finished a casual chore. There, he said. That should do it. Alex looked around, then back at him. Hey. The Presence smiled again. It's been nice, Alex. Then his expression became just a bit more serious. Don't be tempted by such egotistical ideas, he advised. And maybe I won't have to call the man upstairs. Alex tilted his head. Who? The Presence glanced toward a wall of nothingness, his expression unreadable. Then, with a small smile, he simply said. It's not important. And just like that, he was gone. Alex floated there for a moment, the void around him slowly fading as the newly restored world took shape. Then, at last, he looked down at the note in his hand. Thomas Wayne's final gift to his son. With a slow breath, Alex closed his fingers around it. The universe was restored. Barry would remember. And Alex? He had work to do. Chapter 26, Power Reveal / Explanation, so far. Basically a explanation chapter for the fucktard who put a dong in my reviews. The MC's power is imagination without limits, the sole concept of it resides within him, who put him there with the power is spoiler and his goal is major spoiler. Now why MC doesn't just revive his parents or just, turn into any nigh omnipotent being like Azathoth. Because the MC knows too much power is just like money, like a drug, while easy to let go it's hard get back together. Also supporting evidence, Batman, just take one look when Superman was arrested and gave his powers to Batman via, I'm pretty sure, the gold kryptonite, bro became a dictator in less than a month, I think, but he did become a dictator. Blah blah blah, MC 21 20 seconds you get the drill, now why I didn't have him have a superheroine as a waifu, first of just think of Margaret as a thick MILF and activated monkeys, then also for the fact that I really don't like when authors do that, their relationships with their canon lover is not to be easily broken, even then I personally think it's a little wrong. Anyways you all are entitled to your opinions and thoughts and I respect that, just don't, please don't put a dong in the review section, TYSM, and hope you enjoy. Get over your puny C-sharp CKs, it's not that easy to get Raven. Chapter 27, Chapter 26, A Father's Words. I'm feeling generous. Underscore 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 un. The Batcave was as silent as ever, save for the rhythmic tapping of fingers against a sleek, high-tech keyboard. Towering monitors bathed the cavern in a dim glow, flickering through countless news reports, police records, and surveillance footage from across the globe. Bruce Wayne, clad in the dark silhouette of his batsuit cowl off, revealing his sharp, haunted gaze, leaned forward, analyzing recent disturbances both inside and outside of Gotham. There was always something. Bane. San Francisco. That alone was enough to raise alarms. Bane wasn't just a brute, he was a tactician. If he was in San Francisco, it wasn't just some random assault, there was purpose to it. Red Tornado, Batman's voice was sharp, commanding, as he pressed a communicator on his gauntlet, contact Young Justice. I want them in San Francisco immediately. Their mission, find out what Bane is doing and report back. If necessary, intervene. Minimal casualties. A moment later, the robotic yet calm voice of Red Tornado responded through the Batcave's speakers. Acknowledged, Batman. I will alert them immediately. Good. That was handled. But Batman's focus never wavered. His mind had already begun moving on to the next crisis before. A voice, warm yet professional, called from behind him. Master Wayne. Alfred Pennyworth, ever the perfect gentleman, entered the Batcave with measured steps, holding a small, elegantly sealed envelope in his gloved hands. Mail for the Caped Crusader has arrived. Batman turned his head slightly. From who? Alfred's expression remained neutral, polite as ever, but there was something in his eyes. A glimmer of something rare. I think you are going to want to see the sender, sir. That alone gave Batman pause. Alfred never made a remark like that unless it was something serious. Slowly, he reached out and took the envelope from Alfred's hands. His sharp gaze fell upon the sender's name at the top. And for the first time in a long, long time, Batman froze. The name on the envelope read Thomas Wayne. His father's name. But that was impossible. His mind raced through every possible explanation. A forgery? A cruel joke? Some kind of trick played by an enemy? No. Something felt off. He studied the handwriting. It was close, very close, but something was different. Thomas Wayne had always had a softness to his writing, much like his mother, Martha Wayne. His father's notes always carried a certain warmth to them, a deliberate care in every stroke of ink. This was not the same. Whoever wrote this was precise, methodical. Yet at the same time, genuine. Batman carefully unfolded the envelope and pulled out the note. Then, he began to read. To my son, Bruce. I don't know if this letter will reach you. I don't know if time, fate, or whatever forces control the universe will allow you to read this. But if you are reading it, then somehow, my words have found their way home. There's so much I wish I could say, so much time we've lost. But that's not why I'm writing this. I'm writing this because you are Batman. And I need to remind you of something important. Bruce, the Batsuit is not a murder tool. It is not the armor of a ruler. It is not a crown. It is a symbol. A symbol to the villains that there is justice in this world, and that they will never escape it. A symbol to the people who live in fear, that someone is watching over them in the dark, protecting them, even when no one else will. It is not meant to consume you. You are not alone in this fight. I know that you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. I know you carry burdens no one else could ever understand. But Bruce, you are still human. And that is not a weakness. I love you, son. And tell Alfred I hope he's taken good care of you. Batman's grip on the note tightened slightly as he reached the final words. His throat felt tight. His mind was screaming, trying to rationalize it. Trying to deny it. But his heart told him the truth. He stared at the paper for a long moment, rereading each word, his mind dissecting every line, every stroke of the ink. Then, Alfred's voice broke the silence. Shall I get it examined for fingerprints, sir? Bruce hesitated. For just a fraction of a second, he considered it. It was the logical thing to do. The rational thing to do. But no. Bruce slowly folded the note, placing it carefully inside the envelope once more. No, Alfred, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Calmer. It's fine. He stood up, reaching for his cowl. I'm going out. Alfred, ever observant, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He simply nodded. As Batman walked away, his long cape flowing behind him, Alfred's eyes caught something else inside the envelope. A second, smaller note. Curious, the butler reached inside and pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. His breath caught slightly as he read the words. To Alfred. Take care of him for me. Batman is not an emotionless being. It is quite the opposite, especially for me. Alfred blinked. Then, slowly, a small, knowing smile formed on his face. Of course, sir, he whispered to himself, his voice barely above a breath. Even in death or wherever he was, Thomas Wayne was still watching over Bruce. And Alfred? Alfred would continue to do the same. With quiet care, he placed the note back in the envelope, setting it gently on the Batcomputer's console. Then, with a final glance toward the cave entrance, where Batman had already disappeared into the night, Alfred simply shook his head and muttered. Stubborn as always, Master Wayne. And deep down, despite everything, he wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 28, Chapter 27, A Favor for Constantine. The warm aroma of freshly cooked pancakes filled the small kitchen, blending harmoniously with the rich, savory scent of bacon sizzling on the stove. The morning sunlight peeked through the windows, casting a golden glow over the humble home. Alex stood at the stove, a spatula in one hand and a plate in the other. He carefully flipped a pancake onto the plate, then turned to glance at James, who was sitting at the kitchen table, eagerly waiting for his breakfast. Almost done, kiddo. Alex said with a smirk. James grinned, his small hands tapping excitedly against the table. You make the best pancakes, Alex. Margaret, sitting across from James, smiled warmly as she sipped her coffee. On her plate sat a perfect serving of crispy bacon and eggs, just how she liked them. You spoil us too much, Alex, Margaret said, her voice full of affection. Alex chuckled as he placed James' plate in front of him before returning to the stove. Maybe, but I like taking care of people. Some might have thought it was soft for a man to enjoy cooking and looking after others, but Alex didn't care. This life was peaceful. He had spent so long fighting, surviving, unraveling the chaos of the universe. Here, in this little house with James and Margaret, he found something different, a kind of happiness that was calm, stable, and real. And for once, he wanted to hold onto it. The soft hum of the house settling for the night filled the air. The kitchen lights had been dimmed, the plates from dinner cleaned and put away. Outside, the stars shined faintly against the dark sky, and a cool breeze rustled the trees just beyond the window. Alex stood in James' bedroom, carefully tucking the boy into bed. James, his face still full of youthful excitement, looked up at Alex with bright eyes. School ends tomorrow, James said, his voice brimming with anticipation. Are we gonna do something fun? Alex smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. Of course. You think I'd let your first day of summer go to waste? James beamed before yawning, his excitement slowly giving way to drowsiness. Good night, Alex. Good night, kiddo. As James' breathing slowed, signaling that he had drifted off to sleep, Alex turned and quietly left the room. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, something felt off. A presence. Something unfamiliar, yet, strangely recognizable. His eyes narrowed as he stepped into the living room. There, sitting comfortably in his armchair, was a man with disheveled blonde hair, a long brown trench coat, and a cigarette lazily hanging from his lips. John Constantine. The notorious warlock and occult detective. Alex folded his arms and leaned against the doorway. You know, most people knock. John smirked, exhaling a small puff of smoke. And most people don't go messing around with time and space, but here we are. Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, Constantine, what do you want? John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His usual smirk faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. I need a favor. Alex arched an eyebrow. Depends. What kind of favor are we talking about? John took another drag from his cigarette before flicking the ashes onto the floor, something Alex mentally noted to yell at him for later. It's about why we searched your soul a while back, John began. Something, escaped from hell. Alex's expression darkened. Escaped. John nodded. It's like a spawn, but different. That got Alex's attention. Spawn-like creatures were never a good sign. Kinda of. They were powerful, dangerous, and usually tied to some very bad things, mainly Satan. And what makes this one special? Alex asked. John exhaled slowly, his face grim. It's been leaving decayed husks in its wake. Bodies with their minds intact, but their souls are gone. They're more like slaves than anything else. Alex frowned. That wasn't normal, not even for Hellspawn. You want my help locating it? John nodded. You're one of the few people who understand this kind of thing. Alex narrowed his eyes. And what exactly makes you think I understand it? John smirked, leaning back in the chair. You can transform into me. Alex's body stiffened. And so, what does that have to do with understanding this? John chuckled, pointing at Alex with the cigarette between his fingers. And if I'm right, you know how to use my powers. Silence hung between them. Alex exhaled slowly. He should have known better than to try and play mind games with John Constantine. And how do you know that? Alex asked. John's grin widened. Because, mate, you just told me. Alex groaned, running a hand down his face. Damn it. John laughed, clearly enjoying himself. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone, John teased, waving his hand. But that's exactly why I need you. If I'm right, your abilities give you insight into magic, souls, and all that lovely supernatural bollocks. Alex sighed. So what's the plan? John stood up, stretching as he put out his cigarette on the coffee table, which Alex mentally added to his list of things to yell at him for later. Simple, John said. You enjoy your little family time, take care of the kid. But once his school is out. His expression turned serious once more. We hunt this thing down. Alex exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He looked toward the hallway, where James was still sound asleep. He had wanted to keep his life peaceful. To just enjoy this normal existence for a little longer. But if something truly dangerous was out there, he couldn't ignore it. Not when innocent people were suffering. Even though he really wanted to. Alex turned back to John, his expression firm. Fine. But I'm not doing this blindly, I want all the information you have before we start. John smirked. Wouldn't expect anything less. As John moved toward the door, he stopped for a brief moment. One last thing, mate. Alex sighed. What now? John turned, his blue eyes unusually sharp. I wasn't lying before. There really aren't many people who could understand us magic, souls, the nature of things beyond reality. Even Superman only has 2 relatives, one of which wishes to kill him. He took a step closer. You're different, Alex. I don't know why yet, but something tells me, you're more important than you think. With that, John walked out into the night, disappearing into the shadows. Alex stood there for a long moment, staring at the door. Then, finally, he sighed and rubbed his temples. What the hell have I gotten myself into this time? Chapter 29, Chapter 28, James' Graduation and Realizations. The sun shone brightly in the clear sky, casting warm light over the elementary school's outdoor field. Parents, teachers, and students gathered in small clusters, laughing and chatting as the school's annual 5th grade graduation party took place. Alex stood with Margaret, watching as James excitedly ran around with his friends, his energy seemingly endless. I can't believe he's already moving on to middle school, Margaret said with a small sigh, taking a sip from her lemonade. Feels like just yesterday he was learning to read. Alex chuckled. Yeah, time flies. Personally, Alex had hated middle school. It was a chaotic time, full of social hierarchy nonsense, awkward changes, and too many teachers who seemed like they hated their jobs. Oh, and coarse brainrot arguments. Hopefully, James would have a better experience than he did in both lives. Of course, this wasn't some formal graduation, it was more of a casual celebration. Every year, the school threw a party for the departing 5th graders, with food, games, and activities to make their last day at elementary school special. Tables were lined with food, from classic hamburgers and hot dogs to homemade dishes parents had brought. Teachers and faculty mingled with families, and the atmosphere was lively and warm. As Alex stood beside Margaret, he started to notice something. Margaret knew everyone. Not just the teachers, but the cafeteria workers, the janitors, the front office staff, nearly everyone involved in the school. Even if she didn't know them personally, she at least knew their names. Alex had always been aware that Margaret was deeply involved in the community, especially due to her campaign work, but now he was really starting to understand why. A big part of her campaign focused on helping special kids integrate into society, rather than forcing them to conform to some outdated standard. It made sense that she would be so well acquainted with the school staff. After all, teachers played a huge role in shaping a child's development. If she wanted to change the system, she needed to understand the people inside it. She's really trying to change things. Alex glanced at Margaret, watching as she easily chatted with the faculty, always polite but still carrying that undeniable presence that made people take her seriously. She had always been strong-willed, opinionated, but since she had started working towards something bigger, she had mellowed out in some ways. She still had her sharp tongue, but she was more composed now. Maybe Robert, her ex-husband, really had been a bad husband to that extent. She wasn't perfect, but she had clearly been forced into a situation where she felt like she had to constantly fight. Now, though? Now she had a goal that went beyond just surviving. As they walked through the crowd together, Alex started noticing something else. Whenever Margaret introduced Alex, most of the teachers and staff responded with supportive smiles. I'm happy for you too, one of the teachers said cheerfully. It's nice to see you with someone, Margaret. How did you manage to find someone so young? Another asked playfully. Alex tried not to react, but he could feel a few jealous gazes from some of the men in the crowd. He couldn't blame them. Margaret was what most people would call a MILF. Even with her past bad attitude, she had always been attractive. Now, with her refined confidence, she carried herself in a way that made people pay attention. Alex wasn't bothered by the attention, but he could tell Margaret was amused by it. People sure do like to talk, he muttered as they walked away from another conversation. Margaret smirked. Jealous. More like surprised. Didn't expect to be the topic of conversation today. Margaret chuckled. Well, you are a bit younger than me. People are naturally curious. Alex rolled his eyes but couldn't help but smile. As the party began to wind down, families started packing up, saying their goodbyes, and making plans for the rest of the day. James, still buzzing with energy, ran up to them. That was awesome, he said, practically bouncing. I can't wait for middle school. Alex smirked. Enjoy that enthusiasm while it lasts, kid. Margaret shot Alex a look. Don't ruin his excitement. James pouted. What's wrong with middle school? Alex hesitated. You'll see. Margaret sighed and ruffled James' hair. Don't listen to him. You'll do great. James beamed. As they walked toward the car, Alex glanced at Margaret. So, what's the plan for the rest of the day? Margaret looked at James, who was still bouncing in place. I think he has enough energy to burn for at least a few more hours. Alex smirked. Then maybe we should take him to the park. James immediately lit up. Yes. Can we, Mom? Please. Margaret laughed. Sure, why not? As they got into the car, James practically vibrated with excitement in the back seat. Alex started the engine, glancing at the rearview mirror. Despite everything the weird supernatural encounters, the chaos of his past, and the uncertainties of the future right now, at this moment, things felt good. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 30, Chapter 29, A Conversation with Venom. The sun was starting to set over the park, casting long shadows over the grass. The distant sound of laughter and joyful chatter filled the air as families enjoyed the late afternoon. Children ran across the playground, while parents sat on benches, keeping a watchful eye on them. Alex stood near a large oak tree, watching as Margaret and James played together. James had climbed onto a swing, his face full of determination as Margaret stood behind him, ready to give him a push. Higher, Mom! James cheered. Margaret chuckled, pushing him slightly harder. Alex smiled at the sight. It was peaceful. A rare moment of normalcy in his chaotic existence. But, of course, peace never lasted long for him. A presence in the shadows. Alex felt it before he saw it. A strange, unnatural presence slithering toward him through the grass. At first, he assumed it was just his overactive senses, picking up on something mundane. But then he felt it something cold. Something hungry. He turned his head slightly and saw it. A mass of black slime, pulsating and shifting like a living shadow, creeping toward him from beneath the tree's roots. What the hell? Alex muttered, taking a cautious step back. The slime moved unnaturally, as if it had a mind of its own. It coiled and twisted, extending thin, tendril-like appendages toward him. Then it struck. The tendrils lashed out, latching onto his chest like a parasite. Alex's eyes widened as he felt an overwhelming pull. Something was trying to drain him. For a brief second, he felt his soul being tugged at it, as if this thing was trying to consume his very essence. But his body reacted before his mind could. Instead of struggling, his instincts kicked in and he did the exact opposite of what it expected. He poured massive amounts of cursed energy into it. The effect was immediate. The black slime convulsed violently, twisting and writhing as if in agony. For 5 grueling minutes, Alex kept feeding it, pushing his energy into it like a dam bursting open. He could feel the creature changing, its form shifting, growing stronger but no longer hostile. Then, suddenly, it stopped moving. The black slime began to merge with him. Then he heard it. A voice in his mind. Deep. Smooth. Almost, amused. Such an interesting mind, full of memories and imagination. Alex stiffened. He wasn't hearing this voice through his ears, it was inside his head. Not of this world, yet keeps his power in line. Admirable. Alex narrowed his eyes. And you are? The voice chuckled. Tell me, do you enjoy not doing what you can do? All this godlike power, yet so little action. Alex smirked. Of course not. But hey, it'd be boring and a waste to just solve all my problems by turning into a literal god. That'd be kinda lame, don't you think? The voice hummed in amusement. A rare perspective. Then, it revealed itself. I am Venom. Alex's eyes widened in realization. Venom? As in, the Venom? The one that bonded with Eddie Brock. Venom chuckled again. So, you do know things beyond this world. Interesting. Yes. I don't know how I got here. I only created my own universe to counteract the god mind, but then, next thing I know, I'm here, in a new omniverse. Alex exhaled slowly. This was huge. This wasn't just any Venom. This was the Venom one that had created an entire universe of symbiotes to resist a higher power. Venom continued speaking, his tone almost playful. You know a lot, stranger. Although your memories of us come from comics, movies, and the like. I have to admit, if it were anyone else, they would be prodding and demanding answers. Alex smirked. And you? What are you doing? Probing. But this is more fun than just playing with Eddie. Then, suddenly, Venom's voice brightened in excitement. Ooh, so that's where anti-Venom ended up. Alex scowled. Oi. Stop digging through my memories. Venom chuckled again, clearly enjoying himself. Alex sighed, shaking his head. He had already read what had happened to Eddie Brock in the Venomverse. It wasn't a pleasant ending. Look, Alex said, I get that you're looking for answers, but don't dig through my head like a kid in a candy store. You can stay for now until you find a better host. Venom hummed thoughtfully. Maybe that Lobo guy would fit. Alex immediately shook his head. Definitely not. Lobo with a Venom symbiote? That was a nightmare waiting to happen. Back to normalcy. For now. Alex exhaled, forcing himself to focus. Despite the insane encounter, he had to get back to James and Margaret before they started wondering where he had gone. Turning back toward the playground, he saw James still on the swings, looking over at him with an expectant gaze. Alex. Push me on the swing. Alex smirked. On my way, kid. As he walked back toward them, he could still feel Venom's presence inside him watching, waiting, curious. Whatever this was, whatever Venom's appearance meant for this omniverse, it wasn't going to be simple. But for now, he was going to push James on the swing. Because even with all his power, even with everything happening in the background, these small, human moments were what truly mattered. Chapter 31, Chapter 30, The Venomous Decision. The watchtower was as quiet as ever, orbiting high above the earth, an impenetrable fortress of technology and vigilance. The hum of machinery echoed softly through the vast halls, screens flickering with constant data from around the world. It was the nerve center of the Justice League, a place where some of the most powerful beings in the universe gathered to protect the planet. Inside the monitoring room, John Constantine stood casually, leaning against a sleek metal console, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He took a slow sip, his trench coat draped lazily over his shoulders as he surveyed the scene before him. Alex stood near the center of the room, arms crossed, his gaze shifting between the two figures before him, Batman and Martian Manhunter. Batman's cowl-shrouded eyes were narrowed in suspicion, his presence as imposing as ever, while Martian Manhunter stood tall, his green skin glowing faintly under the dim lighting of the watchtower's control room. Then, Constantine spoke. We found the source of the soul-sucked corpses. Batman's eyes narrowed further, his analytical mind already processing the implications. Alex, meanwhile, turned toward Manhunter, waiting for a reaction. But before anyone could respond, a tendril of black shot out from Alex's side, extending outward and forming into a toothy, grinning head with white, jagged eyes. So this is the Batman, hey? Venom's deep voice echoed through the room, full of amusement. Oh, and I guess we've got two aliens in the room, hey? Constantine chuckled, shaking his head as he took another sip of his coffee. Batman, however, remained silent, his glare fixated on the symbiote as if analyzing every possible threat Venom could pose. Alex sighed. All right, let's just get this over with. Before you ask, Batman, yes, this is the Venom. The one from Marvel Comics. And before you ask how he got here, he doesn't know. Manhunter tilted his head slightly, his red eyes flickering with curiosity. You claim he is from these comics. Then I must ask, what do we do with him? Before Alex could respond, Venom spoke again, his elongated head tendril shifting slightly as he turned toward Batman. I want a different host. This actually made Batman blink. This guy has way too much power for my liking, Venom continued, retracting his tendril slightly. I prefer a little challenge, and let's be real, I ain't doing much when I'm strapped to a guy who could probably punch reality if he wanted to. Silence settled over the room. Batman still hadn't said a word. The atmosphere grew heavier, tension filling the air as the Dark Knight simply stared at Venom, his mind calculating 1,000 different possibilities. Finally, it was Alex who broke the silence. How about we let someone in the Justice League take him? Like, say, Manhunter. Martian Manhunter raised an eyebrow. Why me? Alex smirked. Well, you both have a certain weakness to fire, so this seems like a match made in heaven. Manhunter turned toward Batman. Fine, Batman said after a moment. But if those comics are anything to go by, he's eating only chocolate. Venom huffed. Fine. I suppose that's fair. Then, without warning, the black symbiote erupted from Alex's body like a liquid shadow, tendrils flailing as it surged toward the Martian. Manhunter didn't flinch as the black mass wrapped around his green form, covering him like living armor, sinking into his very being. The moment Venom merged with him, he felt it. The telekinetic power. The shape-shifting abilities. The sheer potential within this new host. Venom hummed in approval. Indeed, this is a more symbiotic choice than Eddie was. Although, his voice grew softer. No one will ever truly replace Eddie. Alex stretched his arms, feeling oddly lighter now that the symbiote had left him. Well, that's settled. Now, can I get a boom tube back to Metropolis? I still have a kid and girlfriend to take care of. Batman, without a word, turned to the console and pressed a few buttons. A bright circular portal opened in the center of the room, a boom tube, ready to take Alex back home. Without hesitation, Alex stepped through. The portal closed behind him, leaving only Constantine, Batman, and the now Venom-enhanced Martian Manhunter in the room. Constantine took another sip of his coffee before finally speaking. Interesting, hey, Bats, he mused. Don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of how a comic character managed to appear in our world. Batman didn't respond. He simply stood there, arms crossed, his mind working through the implications of what had just transpired. But little did anyone know. Only two people in that room understood the true nature of their world. Alex, and Venom. And Venom? Venom was simply thinking about the irony of the situation. After all. Luckily, I secretly put a bit of me on someone else. Chapter 32, Chapter 31, A New Bond. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only came in the dead of night. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound breaking the silence, aside from the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. The city outside was alive. Of course Metropolis never truly slept, but within these walls, the world was peaceful. Everyone was asleep. Except for James. Tucked away in his room, barely older than 12, James wasn't in bed like he was supposed to be. Instead, he was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, his wide, excited eyes fixed on something very special, something new. In front of him, resting on his lap like some strange, living mound of red goop, was his new friend. At first, it had just been a strange substance, something he had discovered a few nights ago on his arm. It wasn't quite liquid, nor was it solid. It pulsed, like it had a heart of its own, shifting and moving with a will that James could feel deep inside him. And then, one night, it spoke. Not in words, at first. No, the first thing James had felt was emotion, a strange but warm sense of curiosity and attachment. Then, slowly, the voice came, whispering in his mind, soft and almost childlike, just like him. You are my host. James had giggled at that. I dunno, are you my friend? The answer had been instant. Yes. We are, bonded. James, being young and adventurous, wasn't scared. He didn't think of it as weird or dangerous. He just saw it as something cool, something his. Now, tonight, he was showing his new friend all of his favorite things. Look, this is my favorite one. James held up a T-Rex toy, its mechanical body powered down for the night. Dad got me this a while ago. It's super strong, but I only use it when I want to play dino fights. The red goop pulsed in response, shifting slightly. Dino, fights? The voice asked, curious. Yet. James grinned, grabbing the toy and making it stomp around the floor, his imagination running wild. T-Rexes are the strongest dinosaurs. Way cooler than any superhero. Well, except Dad, but he's not a superhero, he's just awesome. The symbiote seemed to hum in response, shifting slightly, like it was thinking. Then James picked up another toy, this one a Batman figure. He wrinkled his nose. I don't really like this one. He held it up, shaking his head. I mean, Batman's cool, but he's not a dinosaur. If I could make my own superhero, he'd totally be part T-Rex. The symbiote twitched. You like dinosaurs? James nodded enthusiastically. Of course. Dinosaurs are the best. I want to be one if I ever get powers like Dad. There was a brief silence, and then the voice spoke again. Walk to the mirror, James, and close your eyes. Becoming something new. James blinked. Hey? Why? Trust me. I want to show you something. James hesitated for only a second before his excitement won over. He jumped to his feet and walked over to the mirror on the wall, his reflection staring back at him. His messy brown hair, his bright green eyes, the pajamas he was wearing, it was all normal. Now, close your eyes. James did as he was told. The moment his eyes shut, he felt it. A strange, but not uncomfortable, sensation spread over his body like warm liquid, yet it didn't soak into his skin. It moved, shifting, wrapping around him like a second skin. It wasn't cold, nor was it heavy. Instead, it felt right. Like it was meant to be there. And then. Now. James opened his eyes. What he saw in the mirror made his jaw drop. His entire body was now covered in red symbiotic material, sleek and smooth like liquid armor. His small frame looked bigger, stronger, but it wasn't just the color or the texture that caught his attention. It was the design. Across his chest, stretched a green spider emblem, standing out against the crimson hue. But even cooler were the T-Rex-like features: clawed fingers, thick, powerful toes, a long, muscular tail that wagged behind him. And then there was his head. It wasn't just his normal face covered by the symbiote, it had changed completely. His head now had the distinct shape of a T-Rex, his mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, yet he still felt like himself. James stared. Then he grinned. This is so cool, he shouted, his tail wagging wildly behind him. The symbiote's voice laughed softly in his mind. I am Rex. James tilted his head. Rex? That's your name. Our name. James beamed. That's the best name ever. James twirled in front of the mirror, lifting his clawed hands, flexing his new muscles, and even stomping the floor a few times. It felt natural, as if this form had been inside him all along, just waiting to come out. As long as we keep this between us, all right. Rex said, his voice holding a hint of playfulness. James paused, looking at himself in the mirror. Why? Because, we are still young. Still growing. If we reveal ourselves too soon, others might fear us. James pouted slightly, but he understood. All right, but we can do this every night, right? Every night. James smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had a friend. A friend who was always with him, a friend who understood him in ways no one else could. One day, we'll tell Dad, right? There was a pause. Later. For now, enjoy it. I'll be with you, James. Whenever you need me. James nodded, stepping back from the mirror. His clawed fingers flexed, his tail swayed, and his new T-Rex-like form stood proudly in the dim light of his room. He didn't feel scared. He didn't feel worried. He just felt right. And so, with a happy wag of his tail, James turned away from the mirror, climbed back into bed, and drifted off to sleep, his new best friend wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Chapter 33, Chapter 32, When One Door Closes. The smell of chocolate pancakes filled the kitchen, rich and sweet, lingering in the air like a warm hug. The sizzling of batter on the pan crackled softly as Alex flipped another pancake with practiced ease. For weeks now, James had been obsessed with chocolate pancakes, and Alex, ever the doting father, wasn't about to disappoint him. At the table, Margaret sat, resting a hand on her growing belly, her eyes half-lidded from sleep but filled with quiet amusement. She didn't mind eating the same thing every morning just as long as she was eating. Pregnancy cravings had hit her like a truck, and though she wasn't as particular as James, she was always hungry these days. She hummed, rubbing her stomach. I swear, this baby is turning me into a bottomless pit. I could eat 5 more of those, easy. Alex smirked, stacking another golden brown pancake onto the growing pile before turning to his wife. Don't tempt me, woman, he teased. I'll have to make a second batch at this rate. Margaret grinned, resting her chin in her palm. Not my fault you make the best pancakes in the world. James, still in his pajamas, was practically vibrating with excitement as he waited for his plate. He kicked his feet under the table, his eyes locked onto the chocolate-drizzled stack like a hunter stalking prey. Dad, hurry, he whined. I'm starving. Alex rolled his eyes, finishing up the last pancake before setting a heaping plate in front of James. Here, Your Royal Highness. Feast. James immediately dug in, stuffing a piece into his mouth and moaning like he had ascended to a higher plane of existence. So good, he garbled through a full mouth. Margaret giggled. Don't talk with your mouth full, baby, she chided, though she was already reaching for her own plate. As the family enjoyed their breakfast, Alex took a moment to soak it in. These quiet moments, his wife, his son, their home filled with warmth, they made all the hard work worth it. But, unfortunately, the world outside didn't stop for breakfast. With a sigh, Alex pushed back from the table, wiping his hands on a towel. "All right," he said. "I gotta head out. The store won't open itself." Margaret gave him a look. "You sure you don't want to take a day off?" "Can't afford to," Alex said, grabbing his jacket. James, still chewing, mumbled something unintelligible before swallowing. "Bye, Dad. Can you make more pancakes tomorrow?" Alex chuckled, ruffling his son's hair as he passed. "If you behave, we'll see." James grinned. "I always behave." Margaret and Alex exchanged a look before both saying at the same time, "Sure you do." James pouted, but Alex was already out the door. An unexpected goodbye. Alex walked the familiar route to the small convenience store where he had been working for years. It was a humble place, barely scraping by. The kind of store that still had old wooden shelves, a rusty bell above the door, and faded posters from decades ago hanging on the walls. It was nothing fancy, but it had been his job ever since he was young, given to him by an old man who, despite his gruff exterior, had been like family. But when Alex finally arrived, he stopped in his tracks. The store was closed. Not just closed for the day, closed permanently. The windows were dark, the door locked, and standing outside, waiting for him, was the old man himself. Alex's stomach sank. "Boss." The old man, Mr. Peterson, looked at him with a tired but kind smile. In his wrinkled hands, he held a plain envelope. "Figured I'd wait for you," the old man said. "Didn't want you to walk all this way for nothing." Alex frowned, his hands clenching at his sides. "What happened?" "I mean, I know business wasn't great, but..." Mr. Peterson chuckled. "Kid, I'm old." He gestured at the store. "This place is old. And frankly, neither of us are getting any younger. I decided it was time to close up shop before I croak behind the register." Alex felt a pang of sadness. This job, this place, it had been with him for so long. It wasn't much, but it was his. "So that's it," he muttered. "That's it," Mr. Peterson confirmed. Then he held out the envelope. "LexCorp gave me something for you, Alex." Alex stared at it, confused. "LexCorp? What the hell does LexCorp want with me?" The old man smirked. "Why don't you open it and find out?" Alex took the envelope, but before opening it, he looked at Mr. Peterson and sighed. "Thanks, old man. For everything." The old man grunted. "Thank me by finding a job you actually like." Alex snorted, shoving his hands in his pockets. Yeah. Just, stay safe, alright? And when you do kick the bucket, make sure someone invites me to the funeral." Mr. Peterson barked out a laugh. "Snarky brat. Of course I'd invite you." With one last nod, Alex turned and walked away, gripping the envelope tightly in his hand. A new opportunity. As Alex made his way home, he finally tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter. An invitation. To LexCorp. More specifically, a potential internship opportunity, asking him to come by tomorrow. Alex stopped walking, staring at the paper. LexCorp? Him? He let out a low whistle, running a hand through his hair. "Well, I'll be damned." He read the letter again, just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Nope. It was real. For a long moment, Alex just stood there, looking at the closed-down store in the distance, then at the shining city skyline ahead of him. A door had closed. But another one had just opened. A slow smirk crept onto his face. "Guess the saying's true, huh," he muttered to himself. When one door closes, another opens. And with that, he tucked the letter into his pocket and kept walking toward whatever came next. Underscore 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 un. Hey peeps, what's up? Yeah, nothing much as I expected, but that's fine because by the time you're reading this I'm not posting here for a week, but my new web novel, Grey Lantern's Flight, will be up. I honestly hope you enjoy this. And that. But for now, I hope ya enjoy insert dumb wheezing laugh. Chapter 34, Chapter 33, A Hand Extended. Metropolis. The city of tomorrow stood tall, bathed in the golden light of the midday sun. Skyscrapers stretched high into the sky, their glass surfaces reflecting the clouds as they moved lazily overhead. Down below, the heartbeat of the city thrummed with life. Cars honked, people bustled about, and the hum of technology filled the air. For Superman, it was a familiar sight, a comforting one. At least, it had been. Everything changed 6 months ago. It was supposed to be like any other day until Doomsday arrived. The battle had been brutal, devastating. Buildings crumbled, civilians screamed, the earth itself shook beneath their blows. But just as Superman was preparing for the final, desperate push to put the monster down, someone else arrived. A Kryptonian. A man with strikingly familiar features. He called himself Alan. No, he called himself Superior Superman. And from the moment Superman saw him, the resemblance struck like a lightning bolt. He looked like Alex. The way he moved, the way he spoke, even the sharpness in his eyes, it was uncanny. But there were differences, too. His suit was sleek, a darker shade of blue than Superman's, with a bold white emblem stretched across his chest, yet he wore it proudly. Together, they had stopped Doomsday. Together, they had saved Metropolis. And now, a year later, Superman was meeting him again, this time, in a place he least expected. LexCorp Tower. LexCorp Tower, the office of Lex Luthor. Superman landed silently on the balcony, stepping through the massive reinforced glass doors into Luthor's office. The interior was pristine, polished to perfection, with a single desk at the far end and an entire wall made of glass, overlooking the city. And waiting for him. Alan. And Luthor. Superman kept his expression carefully neutral, his gaze flickering between the two men. Luthor, ever the businessman, was perfectly composed, a sharp, black suit with a deep violet tie, his bald head gleaming under the ambient light. His chair was turned toward the window, his fingers steepled as he watched the skyline with an intensity that unsettled even Superman. "Take a seat," Luthor said without looking. Superman hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping forward and lowering himself into the chair across from the desk. He could feel Alan watching him, his expression unreadable. Then Alan smirked, leaning casually against the desk. "Coffee?" he asked. "I've been practicing something new. I learned how to use my heat vision as microwaves instead of lasers lets me warm things up without burning them. Pretty neat, hey?" Superman let out a small exhale through his nose, shaking his head. "No thanks. Maybe next time." "Suit yourself," Alan shrugged. Superman turned his attention fully to Luthor now. Whatever this meeting was, it wasn't casual. "Why did you call me here, Luthor?" Luthor finally shifted, his piercing green eyes locking onto Superman's with an expression that if Superman didn't know any better almost seemed sincere. "Because things have changed, Superman," Luthor said. "I have changed." Superman arched a brow. "Luthor? Changing?" That was a hard pill to swallow. "Explain," Superman said, crossing his arms. Luthor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "A year ago," he began, "I disappeared. I went into hiding because I had no choice. I was put into a coma." Superman narrowed his eyes. "By who?" Luthor's lips curled into a knowing smirk, but he didn't answer directly. "That doesn't matter," he said smoothly. "What matters is what I saw. What I experienced." Superman frowned. "And what exactly did you experience?" Luthor leaned back, exhaling slowly. "The truth." A silence stretched between them. Alan folded his arms, watching quietly. "For years," Luthor continued, "I have sought control. I have sought power. I believed that the only way to save this world was to rule it, to bend it to my will and create a future in my image." Superman's jaw tightened. "And now you think differently?" Luthor let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Superman," he said, his voice almost tired, "do you know what it's like to watch your own undoing?" Superman's eyes narrowed. "Undoing?" Luthor's fingers tightened against the desk. "I saw it over and over. Hundreds of times. 1,000 times. Every mistake I made, every future I created, every empire I tried to build, all of them fell. Every version of me, in every story, in every possibility, they all failed. Some in ways more catastrophic than I could ever imagine." Superman said nothing. Luthor's voice grew quieter. "Do you know what happens when you watch yourself fail enough times?" A bitter smirk tugged at his lips. "You learn humility." Superman remained silent for a moment, studying him. "So that's why you cut ties with Waller," Superman said. Luthor nodded. "Waller is a relic of an old way of thinking. A way that leads to nowhere but destruction. I refuse to be part of it anymore." Superman narrowed his eyes. "And what do you want from me?" Luthor leaned forward, extending a hand across the desk. "To work together." Superman blinked. "You want me to believe you are suddenly on my side?" "No," Luthor admitted. "I don't expect you to believe me immediately. But I do expect you to see the results of my actions." Superman sat back, considering. This was unexpected. Even a year ago, this conversation would have been impossible. He glanced at Alan. Alan, still smirking, simply shrugged. "I didn't do anything bad," he said casually. "It's your decision to trust him or not." Superman inhaled deeply before standing. "Luthor," he said, his voice steady, "I can trust you, but my team will need extensive proof before they do. And this will take steps, one at a time." Luthor smiled, standing as well. "Then let's take the first step." They shook hands. The weight of that moment settled over the room like a silent storm on the horizon. As Superman turned to leave, he heard Alan speak up. "So," Alan said, his voice quieter now, "are you telling the truth?" Luthor was silent for a moment. Then, he spoke. "If it was a year ago? No." He looked toward the city, his expression unreadable. "But now? I mean it." Alan tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Then tell me, what did you see in the coma Alex put you through?" Luthor's hands clenched into fists. His voice was quiet. "My own undoing." He exhaled. "Over 100 times.